pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. All right, good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. As I said, this is a regular meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Village of Wilmette. We'll call the matters in the order which they appear on the printed agendas, and there are agendas on the table by the door, so you may want to have a copy so you can follow along to see when your matter will be called. Now, if you plan to address us tonight, we ask that you please come up to the podium, please speak into the microphone and tell us who you are and where you live, as that may be relevant to the matter at hand. We ask that you speak clearly in the microphone so we can hear you, because everything you say and everything we say is being recorded. And from those recordings, minutes of the meeting are prepared. These minutes are available at Village Hall in hard copy form, as well as on our website at wilmot.com. Also, our Village Board meetings are televised, and if you look up in the corners of the room, you can actually see the cameras. That's on Local Access Channel 6 and on the Internet. By televising our meetings, we make it easy for our neighbors in the community to follow the proceedings of the Village Board, to see the types of matters that come before us, the questions we ask, and the policies we create. You can find archived videos of Village Board and other local government meetings on our website at wilmette.com. And I'd like to personally thank all those residents who regularly tune into Channel 6 to follow the workings of their local government. Now, before each meeting, the Board receives a packet of agenda materials, and these materials are also posted on wilmette.com on the Friday before our meeting, so that residents and other interested parties can review the very same materials that board members receive. This week's packet contained 560 pages. We've had an opportunity to review all the information in the agenda packet, so if you do plan to address us tonight, we ask that you tell us the most relevant, most material, most important points that you want us to focus on. And finally, we are a community of neighbors, and as such, we want our meetings to be as civil and courteous as possible. So as a courtesy to those around you, please take this time to turn off your cell phones and other devices. And while we're turning off our phones, Madam Clerk, please call the roll.
Trustee Wolf.
Here.
Trustee Sullivan.
Here.
Trustee Plunkett.
Here.
Trustee Dodd.
Here.
Trustee Kurzman.
Here.
Trustee Pierce.
Here.
President Blinsky.
Here. We're all here, so we obviously have a quorum. Next item on the agenda is item 2, public comment. During public comment, we ask if there's any member of the audience who would like to address the board on an item which is not on the agenda. Members of the audience may address the board on matters which are on tonight's agenda when the particular matter is called. So is there any member of the audience who would like to address the board right now on a matter which is not on the agenda? May I see a show of hands? Yes, sir.
My name is Stasha Rosenthal. I live at 430 Beverly Drive. Got tired of reading the crime reports, and I have a few copies here. An unknown offender stole his unsecured bicycle. An offender entered her unlocked car. Two offenders entered 2 of the victims' unlocked cars. Another unlocked car had the keys left in it. And I have other pages. I'm sure you're familiar with all this. I think something needs to be done about this, because the word gets out. Some people are leaving their vehicles, bicycles, whatever, unsecured, and it invites people to come up to the neighborhood and do this kind of mischief. And so I'm suggesting that, and then the police have to go to the victim's house and take a report. It's a waste of police time. Just the way the village passed an ordinance that if, people's home alarms go off more than 3 times, you get fined $50, I believe, the first time. Maybe it's $100 the second time. The word has to get out to people that they have to lock up their cars, their bicycles, or whatever. And the only way to do that sometimes is you propose a fine. You can report the crime, but we're going to charge you $50 because you left the door open, you left the vehicle unsecured, you left the keys in the car, or at least, the very least, make the victim go to the police station and cut down maybe on wasting police time. So nobody likes to have a fine, but it's the only way sometimes people learn is if they have to pay the price. So that's my suggestion to the village board.
Thank you.
Cut down on unwanted, police wasting their time and cut down maybe on people coming up to our village and doing these kinds of crimes. They won't do them if they know everything is locked up. That's my idea.
Thank you, sir. I will say that we have, and we are currently working again on a communication plan to try to get the word out, because your perception is accurate from the point of view that you don't want people to get the sense that everything's wide open and unlocked in Wilmette.
Charge them, and you'll see the behavior change very quickly. Have a good evening.
Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Kate Jaya, and I live at 325 Central Avenue, and I'm co-president of the League of Women Voters. And tonight I'm speaking, as you might be able to tell from my shirt this evening, and I'm speaking tonight on behalf of the League. Today is National Voter Registration Day. Founded in 2012, National Voter Registration Day is designed to create an annual moment when the entire nation focuses on registering Americans to exercise their most basic right, the right to vote. Over 1.6 million voters have registered to vote on National Voter Registration Day since its inception. The League of Women Voters is proud to participate in National Voter Registration Day, as the promotion and protection of voter rights is core to our mission. Today, the Wilmette League had pop-up registration and information sites at 12 different locations in Wilmette and Skokie. Over 30 of our members contributed more than 60 hours of time registering voters and providing voter information. To give you a sense of the magnitude of the effort today, and we are still collecting information as we had sites that closed after 6 o'clock today, we made contact with more than 700 people, handed out bookmarks and palm cards with voter information to hundreds of these people, and assisted almost 50 people with registration. Many thanks to the Village of Wilmette, the Wilmette Park District, the Wilmette Library, New Trier High School, Niles North High School, Skokie Park District, Mather Place, Malincrot, and Starbucks for hosting League volunteers at registration sites throughout the day. And thank you all to those who worked so hard to make National Voter Registration Day a success in our community and around the country. Early voting begins, as a reminder, on October 22nd, and Election Day is November 6th. You can learn more about the candidates from the Illinois Voters Guide and here at our Village Hall at the League of Women Voters Forum on October 20th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anyone else who'd like to be heard on a matter which is not on the agenda? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to item 3, which is the consent agenda. So as described on the printed agenda, items which are routine business that are not normally debated by the village board are placed on the consent agenda. And tonight, it's a big consent agenda. All items that begin with the number 3 are on the consent agenda, starting on page 1 with item 3.1. Then all the items on page 2, all of the items on page 3, all of the items on page 4, and the first 3 items on page 5, ending with item 3.33. Items on the consent agenda are up for approval tonight, and if an item is not removed by a member of the audience and not removed by one of the trustees, it will be approved and will not be discussed. So I'll begin by asking if there's any member of the audience who would like to remove an item from the consent agenda. May I see a show of hands? Okay, seeing none, I'll move on to ask if there's any items that any of the trustees would like to remove from the consent agenda.
Yes.
Trustee Kurzman.
I would like to remove items 3.5 and 3.11 from the consent agenda, please.
3.5 and 3.11. Okay,
I'm going to remove 3.15.
and 3.15. Any other items? Okay. So may I have a motion to adopt the consent agenda excluding items 3.5, 3.11, and 3.15?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, please call the roll on the motion to adopt the consent agenda.
Trustee Wolf.
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
Aye.
Trustee Dodd.
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman.
Aye.
Trustee Pierce.
Aye.
President Blinsky.
Aye. So the motion carries. The consent agenda has been adopted. If you are here for an item on the consent agenda, it's been approved, and I'll clarify for people who are here tonight. Again, all of the items beginning with the 3 have been approved, and that includes land use item 3.4, 3.6, 3.7, 3.8, 3.9, 3.10, 3.12, 3.13, and 3.14, as well as Judiciary Committee item 3.33. All those items have been approved. If you're here for one of those items, You are free to leave because there will be no further discussion of those items or any of the other items on the consent agenda. Now, a lot of people are leaving. It's early. Please be sure to stop by one of our restaurants downtown before heading home. Okay, next item on the agenda is item 4, which is report of officers. I was going to make some comments about some of the items that were on the consent agenda, but they've been removed, so I'll spare you those comments until the items come up. So we'll start with a report from our Assistant Village Manager, Mr. Brayman, who's sitting in for Mr. Frenzer tonight.
Thank you, Mr. President. I have 2 items to report on. The first is that last week, the village, in partnership with the CTA, installed 2 new pay-by-space parking machines at the CTA parking lot. The new stations provide a quicker, easier way to pay for parking, including the option to pay from your smartphone, just as we provide at the Metro station. If CTA commuters have unused tokens from the old pay stations, those can be returned to Village Hall for a full refund through November 2nd. The second item I want to report on tonight is just to highlight an item that was on the consent agenda, and that is an extension of our residential refuse and recycling contract with Advanced Disposal. With this, we're pleased to announce some exciting new services for our residents, which include curbside composting of organic materials to begin in April 2019, a permanent electronics recycling drop-off at our Public Works facility, and rate stability, as there will be a rate freeze in 4 of the next 5 years, as well as a $120,000 annual budget savings with Advanced Disposal assuming responsibility for the hauling and disposal of leaves associated with our annual leaf collection program. In total, we project more than $1.2 million in savings over the next 5 years from this contract extension, as well as those additional new exciting services for our residents. Moving forward, we'll utilize our various communication forums to inform residents of these new services and how to take advantage of them. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Mr. Brayman.
So, just a question on that. On the curbside composting, I expect there will be a lot of citizen interest, and I'm assuming there'll be some type of publicity, education as to how this will happen?
Absolutely. So that begins in April 2019, so we have some time to work with Advanced Disposal on the mechanics of how that program will work, but that will be a featured story in our February 2019 communicator, and we'll use our e-news, Nextdoor, Twitter, Facebook accounts to help get the word out as well.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next report's from our Corporation Counsel, Mr. Stein.
No report, Mr. Mayor.
And item 5 is the report of the Liquor Control Commissioner. There's no report tonight. So we'll move on to our standing committee reports. Trustee Pierce, I hope you took your 5-hour energy because we're on you.
Considering some of the prior meetings I've been to, I don't think it'll go that late.
So let's, if I could suggest that we take the ones that were on consent first, and we'll save the one that was off of consent originally for last.
Right. So I assume we'll start with item 3.5.
Yeah, let's start with 3.5.
So I move adoption of ordinance 2018-057, amending the zoning ordinance of 2014 zoning code amendment dealing with group homes.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. I'll start, Trustee Kurzman, you asked that this come off, so let's start with you and find out why you removed it, and then we'll decide how to proceed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. As I reviewed the materials and really sunk my teeth into the subject matter, I had a growing sense that the topic on the table was bigger than I think is the process so far has afforded it. I think there are I just have some questions, which some of which were posed in the committee process, but I did not, to my satisfaction, see resolution to those questions. So I guess I'd want to pose some of those questions here. But I think in addition to having a couple of questions, I'm hopeful that this will spur other questions from my colleagues. I just happen to think that it's a bigger deal than perhaps the committee grappled with, and I would want public eyes on it. That's really my purpose.
So for the benefit of the board and for others, would you elaborate on why you think it's a bigger deal?
Well, I guess some of it comes to the answers to some of my questions, but I think potentially the applying to public schools as well, I think has significance. I think loss of tax dollars has significance. And I think outreach to the public is a key ingredient that might be missing right now.
Okay, so, and the questions that you have relate to, who are those questions to be posed to? Mr. Adler, Mr. Stein, the applicant, or the Land Use Committee?
Well, I guess I would probably ask legal counsel just confirmation on whether a home purchased for a group home as a nonprofit organization, just confirmation that there would be no property taxes coming from that property anymore.
So they would have a right to apply to the county for an exemption. So if it is a non-for-profit and it is used for a charitable purpose, that is what the statute says. It has to be for a charitable purpose. If they can establish that and show the Cook County Assessor and the Board of Review from Cook County that in fact is a charitable purpose, then they could very well receive an exemption from property tax. But just automatically, it doesn't happen. You know, because we approve a special use, or we allow this use, or it's a permitted use even, it wouldn't automatically happen. They have to go through an application process, the same way that the village has to go through an application process for all its own property.
And if I can throw in an aside, I've been involved in a few requests for real estate tax exemption matters. The fact that you're a 501c3 does not automatically get you. It's a very challenging process right now to get real estate tax exempt status from the state/county.
The second component that the county is going to look for is whether or not there's any income deriving from the property. So if a charitable entity owns the property and has a group home but then still charges rent, it's very likely that Cook County would say no, that is not going to be that should not be exempted. So there are many factors that come in under the statute, but again, it's Cook County that controls that. So it's not automatic by any means, but it's possible.
Do we know what's the average property tax bill now in Wilmette?
Just under $14,000.
Okay, so if a single, plus or minus, obviously, depending on the size, but we're talking about if there was an average home did manage to get an exemption, it would cost the community as a whole, not Wilmette,
Correct.
the village, but the community as a
Correct.
whole, potentially $14,000
Yes.
or so in taxes, okay.
Per year. So I guess I'm wondering, for the three homes in Evanston, are they paying property?
I believe
Taxes.
one, from what the applicant stated at the Land Use Committee, and this might be better to, explain from the applicant, but I can tell you what was said at the Land Use, was that one home was not, or one home was paying property tax, and the other two homes were not, but were paying some sort of payment in lieu of property tax for police and other fire services.
Does the Evanston ordinance create that opportunity for public schools public school students as well?
I do not know what the Evanston ordinance creates, but I can tell you the reason why I don't believe that a distinction between private and public schools should be on the table is because I believe that a court would deem it illegal.
Right. So I do think there would potentially be quite an uptick for that. My understanding is New Trier does home visits, presumably in part to confirm your residency. Who in their right mind wouldn't want their kids to go to a quality high school? And I just wonder, well, I guess one of my questions is, has this been brought to District 39, District 37, New Trier School District, just to see what their perspective is, whether their public policy would in any way be impacted by a cottage industry, potentially, of group homes, people trying to access great schools.
I believe...
Okay, but I want to make a note because I had one other item, but I want to.
Well, as far as New Trier, I don't know about the other districts, but I do know that New Trier has a policy that I believe, and Mr. Canning can correct me, but I believe it is based upon living with a parent or a guardian. And a group home would not be living with a parent or a guardian. So they would not be considered a resident allowed to attend New Trier by New Trier's own policy. So I believe these things are...
I want to
Having
be clear
represented
that I'm
school
not,
districts
I don't
is
wish
a
to be
big issue.
prescriptive with it. I just want it understood by myself, first and foremost, as someone who's legislating on it, and then also for the public at large. But that is helpful. So the
just trying to
people
answer
who
your
live, the
questions.
people who live with the students would not be considered guardians by that?
No, guardian is a legal term, so as a group home, it's very likely they would not be considered a guardian, but you can take guardianship through a court of anybody if the court says, any child or any minor, if the court says it's okay. So it's going to be probably very highly unlikely that the staff that's living in the group home, or the den mother or whatever you want to call that person, is going to also be a guardian of more than at least one of the children there, but probably not likely any of the children. Again, could it come up? Of course, but there's nothing that we could do about that, whether a group home or not. They'd be allowed to live there anyway if they're all considered part of a child or a guardian or a guardian of those people living in that home. So this would not have that impact on that.
So I'm still curious, have we had dialogue with the school districts on this?
I have not, but I believe the applicant has.
Mr. Canning, are you representing the applicant, or would you approach?
Sure. Good evening, President Belinsky, members of the board. It's true, as Corporation Counsel Stein points out, I did call New Trier. Took them about 2 weeks to get back to me. And this is not an issue, because by the schools, by the district's own definition, the first category of students who are permitted to be in New Trier is a student who resides with a natural or adoptive parent who has custody. So under the Boys Hope, Girls Hope model, the house parents, the phrase we'll use, they are not the natural parents of a student or an adoptive parent. The second category for residency under New Trier, and this is Board of Education Policy 7-60, the student resides with a person other than a parent for reasons other than to have access to the educational programs of the district. Well, the sole purpose for the scholars at Boys Hope, Girls Hope is to engage in education within the district. So again, a program like this, if someone wanted to wake up in the morning and decide they wanted to do this and have the students go to New Trier, it would, by definition, not be able to have those students go to New Trier because they're only in the district to avail themselves of the educational opportunity. So you would, in talking to New Trier and going through their policy, they agreed that a Boys Hope, Girls Hope model would never be able to meet the residency definitions of New Trier High School. So they didn't see this as an issue. So when we talked about this with Trustee Leonard, because he raised the same issue and he was chair of land use, and again, we went over the residency requirements that New Trier imposes and showed it at the time, and I think there was then a transition, because this matter's been kicking around literally for 2 years. Boys Hope, Girls Hope first looked at a house in September 2016 and found out that there was no process by which they could even attempt to set up a home in the village of Wilmette. And Mr. Adler can go through the whole process of how we had to look at the ordinance, and we had to look at the notice requirements, and we had to change those just to have the opportunity to come before the board to have the ordinance, so that perhaps if a home ever becomes available, that it would go through the special use process. In no way, shape, or form was this ever intended to be a permitted use. So there's no chance this will ever be allowed at New Trier. And one of the things I think also in the minutes of the land use is an organization like Boys Hope, Girls Hope has to be has to be approved by DCFS. And in the last decade, I think there's only been, I think the testimony was 4 attempts to do anything like this. And 2 of them were for eating disorders, and 2 of the 4 are already out of business. So no one's trying to do this because the startup costs are gigantic. The budget is close to $2 million a year, because not only do you have the 24 students who are attending Loyola Regina, but Boys Hope Girls Hope then continues to provide scholarship support, tuition support, as well as helping out with financial aid application, grant applications for the 24 that are now moving through college. Because 100% of the students who have gone through, who go through Boys Hope Girls Hope move on to a four-year college. And the graduation rate's about 75% of those who start college.
And what's the nature, or where do these students come from? Who are these students that?
They apply for admission to the program because they live in areas that their parents feel are probably not the safest ones to be in. There was a story a couple of years ago about one of the current scholars. He's a football player for Loyola who was shot in his neighborhood, and his parents wanted to get him out of there. So I think one of our press people over here, I don't know if it's the Life or the Beacon, wrote an article about it, but I'm sure they can call it up on their archives.
Trustee
I have a clarifying question for you, Chris. So you talked about the new tier policy. Is this policy the same for District 39? Because the ordinance is not specific to just high school students.
I did not look at District 39 because we were really just focused on, at the time, what Boys Hope Girls Hope is looking for a girls' house, and those girls, the intent would be for them to go to Regina.
Okay.
So that's what the focus was.
Okay, can I
you
ask?
also-
Okay, so I just want to ask a qualifying question then to our legal counsel. But it is my understanding that this ordinance is to any student. It's not necessarily specific to high school students. Is that accurate?
It's any educational facility.
Any
is
educational
defined.
facility. Okay.
And also to follow up on an earlier discussion you and I had, per DCFS regulation, you can never have less than two adults assigned to the house. So and the reason for that is, unlike many of us parents who may leave the house and leave our teenagers at home, there's always has to be a DCFS, or excuse me, has to be a house parent in the house at all times. So, for example, if a kid got hurt at practice or a kid was late at band practice, if there's only one house parent, they have to get all the other teenagers who are in the house at that time, put them in the car, go to school, and pick up that one kid. So that's why you have to have two parents, two house parents, and if one kid was late from football, one stays and makes dinner, and one goes and picks up the kid at practice.
Does that same regulation apply to adults with a disability?
That I don't know.
Okay.
But in answer to the question of why
I think it does.
why we have to have it staffed the way it is, it's because you cannot leave the teenagers unattended. So again, what goes on at Boys Hope, Girls Hope, candidly, is probably stricter than at least my parenting skills were in terms of watching supervision, mandatory study hours, meals held for the entire home at the same time. So it's a model that's been successful. It has been in this area since 1979. And the homes in Evanston, to your question, Trustee Kurzman, the first home, I believe, part of the special use, Evanston mandated tax payment, real estate taxes would be paid. And as to the other two houses, you asked about, and I'm sorry.
What differentiated the one?
Excuse me, let me just find what you were asking about. The latest agreement was as of 2010 between Boys Hope and Girls Hope that they would pay $1,500 in lieu to the city of Evanston for 10 years, so 2010 to 2020.
$1,500 for 10 years.
Yep.
What differentiated the one property from the other two?
One house came first and the other houses came later. It was an accident of timing.
So is the fundamental problem that this program is trying to address a lack of affordable housing in the village of Wilmette?
No, it has nothing to do with that.
So
The way it came to be was Boys Hope, Girls Hope was looking for another opportunity These students right now are in Wilmette every day. They come here via Metro or the L. They take the Pace bus. They go to school. They go to Starbucks. They go to the Village Center. The thought was if they could reduce some of the commuting time and have a place closer to school, in this case Regina, they'd be able to spend more time after school. It has nothing to do with affordable housing. Boys Hope, Girls Hope first wanted to expand and looked into Skokie, and Skokie told them they were not interested in having another category of group homes because, according to what I've been told by Boys Hope, Girls Hope, Skokie has 42 group homes of various distinctions, which is more than Wilmette has. So they looked at Wilmette again for proximity to Regina, and when finding that there was not a way to, if a home became available and it met their criteria, and we haven't even started to talk about the criteria, they couldn't even come before the zoning board to even ask. And so that was the intent behind the application, was simply to have an ordinance on the book that if and when a home becomes available, and if it's something that meets the needs of Boys Hope, Girls Hope, they have the opportunity to submit an application for a particular home so that notification goes out to the neighbors, and a zoning board hearing is held where everybody has an opportunity to be heard, and the zoning board either votes to agree or disagrees. And that matter, just like every other zoning board matter, comes to the village board. The village board votes to accept or deny the recommendation that comes from the zoning board. So the whole issue that we're trying to accomplish here is, can we create a mechanism whereby if the opportunity ever presents itself, they have an opportunity to be heard, and all the neighbors have an opportunity to be heard. And that's really what's before you tonight, is simply an ordinance.
So if affordable housing is not a concern, are you saying there's no impediment for a family to move and live near the school?
What do you mean a family?
The family of the student would be able to move and live near the school, similar to how somebody moves and is in the school district for the public schools.
So your hypothetical 14-year-old family is in a neighborhood in the city and wants to leave the city with their 14-year-old, move here.
Yeah.
Okay. And they would just buy a market rate home?
That's why I'm asking, is affordability a key issue?
No. It's focused on the students. It has nothing to do with the parents. The parents aren't being asked to pay any money. This is, the Boys Hope, Girls Hope pays for everything. It pays for tuition. It pays for meals. Honestly, I assume it pays for transportation. The students aren't allowed to have cars. That's why they take public transportation. So unlike a family, if you had multiple teenagers, they may have one or two cars as well. None of these scholars have a car. They are not placed there by the state. They're not wards. They're not guarded by a court. They are there through an application process, and they're selected. So it has, affordability is not an issue. And in fact, if Boys Hope, Girls Hope would buy a home in Wilmette that's going to need probably a minimum of 7 bedrooms to meet the requirements of DCFS, to make sure that the students are one floor, the house parents are another floor, there's a certain number of bathrooms, because only 4 scholars can use a bathroom, that you cannot have any bedrooms in the basement. To meet a house like that, Trustee Kurzman, you could, I think, estimate what the cost of a house like that would be.
Well, thank you for taking my questions.
You know, actually, I would like to expand on what Trustee Kurzman was saying, because I think it's an interesting question. So the example you used of a student who got shot and his family wanted to, have him go to a better school. I think the question was coming if that family is looking for a different school and have decided that the school area that they'd like to go to is in Wilmette. If that family could afford a home here in Wilmette and had some support from, a Boys Hope, Girls Hope, or Loyola, would that help solve, and then would not even solve this problem that what Girls Hope, Boys Hope is trying to do, but would that solve and allow us to have more people who would like to access the schools, go to these schools? I believe that's what Trustee Kurzman was getting at a little bit, and I think it's an interesting question.
But to some extent, there's no residency requirement to go to Loyola Academy or Regina. There are people who live in Chicago, the people who live in Wilmette, there's people who live in Glenview, the people who live all around.
True.
So at least in
Correct.
the case of Boys Hope, Girls Hope, there's nothing around having to live in Wilmette to go to
Okay.
those schools.
Okay.
Just to make sure, because maybe I misread it. This isn't necessarily to approve Boys Hope, Girls Hope.
No, this is just
an
That's
ordinance
exactly
on
true,
group-
right.
We are
on group
public
homes,
policy.
whether it's Boys Hope or the Dan Sullivan charity that I formed that's accredited and one of finance guys kids that come up here.
Right, well, it's all it does is it creates the definition in the zoning ordinance so that there can actually be an ask in the future of can we do this?
Can we do this?
Yes.
Whether it's for
Right
Boys
now,
Hope
you
or
can't do it.
anybody
Right
else.
now, it's prohibited.
Okay.
But Boys
the
Hope,
kids-
Girls Hope was
kids
the original
qualifying for Boys Hope
organization.
is not necessarily relevant, if I understand it.
I'm sorry?
The kids that qualify for Boys Hope isn't relevant.
Because it's not specific to that.
Right. Boys Hope has a charitable organization that they're supporting 24 kids.
48.
Or 48 kids.
Right.
We're just saying that, we're just giving an ordinance that they might consider buying a house here to operate their.
They can make an application.
Right.
If we pass this ordinance, then a group like Boys Hope, Girls Hope could make an application to do what they do in Wilmette.
And they go
It
and
doesn't
they-
approve the application at this
Right.
point in time. They got to go through the normal process.
Unlike a person that's buying a house, they're gonna have to put a bid in on a house and say, subject to approval of zoning and village board of a special use.
Which in a tight real estate market is really hard to do. That's worse than selling your house, probably,
Again,
right?
I felt like we were going down, when we say Boys Hope's the applicant, they applied to have us modify
But
this.
this
Great
doesn't
ordinance.
apply to them only. Yes.
And President Blinsky, I mean, you mentioned when some of the folks left here after the consent agenda was approved to go to our village restaurants. I mean, what Trustee Dodd will remember is when she was back on BDAG, one of the issues we had was every single restaurant had to be a special use. And that seemed to be a barrier to entry to people wanting to create restaurants in logical places to have restaurants like the Village Center. And so in trying to energize the business community and make the Village Center more vibrant, we decided to make a class of permitted uses, restaurants, and other special uses of other types of restaurants that we wanted to take a little bit of a closer look at. Same thing applies here. This is not a permitted use. It was never intended to be a permitted use. The idea is simply to have the opportunity to have it as a special use. So again, an application can be made, notice goes out to the neighborhood, the neighbors come in and they may say, this is the greatest thing that's ever happened to our neighborhood, or this is just too many people in too small of a house.
Right.
And it's up for the zoning board to make a recommendation to the village board.
And we have standards of review that we use to guide those decisions, which include impact on neighborhood, I believe.
Yes,
I
that
don't
is
remember
one of
which
them.
letter that is, John, but it's one of them. Okay. Any further questions for Mr. Canning, Mr. Stein? Mr. Brayman will also answer questions. Mr. Adler?
I have one minor edit, if I may.
Okay.
On 2.4, under group home, the first definition, number 2.
So hang on, this is page 136 of the PDF.
Yes, number
Just
2 of the
happened to be on
ordinance. Number 2 of the page 2 of the ordinance. It's the bolded, underlined text. Second line where it says same educational facility. I would like to strike a local school. It was stricken in the
Typo.
text. It's a typo. It didn't get accepted as a deletion.
Okay. So now do we need to, does
If the
Trustee
movement,
Pierce
yeah.
and the second have to accept that change?
Yes.
So
If you
Trustee
don't
Pierce, you're
Yes.
okay? Who was the second on that?
I
Dan?
think Dan was.
Okay.
Second.
You okay with that as well? Okay, all right.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have a question for Mr. Adler if.
Yes,
when
Mr.
we're
Canning,
done.
thank you. Don't
Thank
go
you.
far.
I think it would help if we had a historical perspective in that when group homes for disabled individuals was permitted, I think it was like late 80s, early 90s, and since that time, what has happened?
Sure. As I recall, it was the late 80s, early 90s. We actually did a rewrite of the zoning code at that time. And at that time, group homes for up to 5 persons with disabilities, and then the support staff was made a special use. At that time, it was very contentious. There was a lot of concern of doing that, allowing 5 unrelated people with disabilities to live in a single-family home. Well, the village board adopted the ordinance. We got our first request for a special use that went through. There was absolutely no incidents. It was as I think most of us knew, it was well run and they were great neighbors. Soon after that, I don't know exactly when, it might have been 5 to 10 years later, we did a text amendment where we actually changed that to be a permitted use. And so currently in the ordinance, you could open a group home for persons with disabilities, with 5 persons with disabilities and support staff, and it's a permitted use. There's a licensing process that goes along with that, but again, it's a permitted use. We had one just open on Manor Drive, not from Loyola Academy. And again, it's my understanding that it's something that just like any other family in the neighborhood, it is worked very, it is working well. So, what this does a couple of things that relates to group homes for persons with the disabilities. One of the things this does, at the recommendation of Corporation Counsel Stein, it does allow group homes for persons with a disability to actually go up to 8 persons with a disability if they apply for a special use. So if somebody who's running a group home for persons with a disability finds a bigger home and they could take 6 or 7, they could apply for a special use. So this expands it in that manner. And I think that's probably a natural next step in how we look at those sorts of group homes. The other thing that happened recently in 2014 at the recommendation of Corporation Counsel, the definition of family was changed. The definition of household, a single-family home needs to be occupied in a certain way, and the definition now just requires that the persons in the household live as a single housekeeping unit, that they share expenses. It used to be that you had to have a maximum of so many people that aren't blood related. That's, when we rewrote the code, that was explained that that's probably not the best way to look at family.
While that was not my recommendation, was Corporation Counsel Zimmerman's, my predecessor, I do absolutely agree with it. The courts are moving away and chipping away at saying unrelated people cannot live together in zoning codes. So it was actually a pretty smart move by Mr. Zimmerman to recommend that.
And I think one of the things that Corporation Counsel mentioned earlier is if you have somebody who has a process in which they could get guardianship over a number of children, it's going to just be allowed. You don't have to go through a special use. If you're the person who's taking care of, doesn't matter the number. If you have a house that's big enough and the building code allows it, and you've got guardianship over them, you could move into a home and occupy that home.
It's not just taken care of. You have to have a court-ordered guardianship. That's what I'm talking about. Not
right.
In this case,
But again, that doesn't belong. That's not applicable here. That's not what we're voting on. What you're saying is, under our zoning code, if any one of the members of the board or any member of the community decided that they were going to go on an adoption spree, and they adopted 6, 8, 10, 12 kids, as long as there wasn't a violation of the building code,
correct,
in that you'd have too many occupants for the home, that's permitted.
Correct.
So that's not what we're voting on.
No.
That is just the case.
That is something that is permitted.
Yes. Okay. All right.
Let's hope.
So while Mr. Adler's here, any other questions for Mr. Adler? Okay. Is there anybody in the audience that would like to be heard on this matter? Okay.
Just one clarification, because I just asked Mr. Stein about this. When we say the same educational, just for clarification, same educational facility, if this home is a girls' home, half of the kids can't go to Loyola and half can't go to Regina. 100% have to go to one
That's the
school.
way the ordinance is written, that is correct. I don't know if that's the intent or not, I don't know if that's what's, in effect, how that's going to be, but it's the same,
When you read that same,
enrolling the
that's what I
students at
wanted
the
to make
same
sure.
educational facility.
Yes, that is the
I
intent.
believe that was the intent.
And Trustee Sullivan, since you mentioned something about Corporation Counsel Stein, you reminded me, you and I had a conversation about real estate taxes and in lieu fees. I believe Corporation Counsel Stein and I are in agreement that if there was ever a time when Boys Hope, Girls Hope came before the board and there was a recommendation to approve it in terms of conditions, that you could not put a condition on to pay real estate taxes, but you could condition approval with the payment, an in lieu payment. Is that accurate?
That's correct. If it's an unagreed upon condition, is my opinion that you can't restrict someone that has a right to apply for an exemption, but at the same point, 6 in one hand, half a dozen in the other, you can require a payment in lieu, and that's why that avenue is there for us.
So that idea remains open into the future, and it's something for this board or a future board to keep in mind.
Trustee Dodd?
And so,
I'm sorry.
So I think I want to just clarify, because because I believe we spoke about this earlier. So, not specific to Boys Hope, Girls Hope, but as part of as part of the special use permit process where somebody's coming in front of us, any organization, if we feel that there will be some cost to the village, whether it's for garbage collection or they're not going to be paying property taxes and will be attending a school or whatever, it can be part of that special use to put some sort of requirement that there be some sort of payment back to the village.
Yes.
Okay.
So I just want to bring that up so you know that remains an option out there.
And we have one, which just lapsed, but we have one with Mather Place. It's the same exact thing. If they were off the tax rolls, they had to pay a certain amount back based upon a formula back to the village, and they did so for years, but now they're on the tax rolls, so that payment in lieu is no longer valid, and it'd be the same type of condition.
Yeah.
Right, and we did, now it wasn't property tax, it was sales tax, but we did the same sort of pilot with
Artists.
with artists.
Yeah,
the-
absolutely,
the
with artists,
Senior
yeah.
home, so. Okay. All right, thank you, Mr. Canning. All right, everybody has sort of had conversations now. I'm not going to, force anyone to add just to the discussion, but I'm also not going to limit anyone who wants to say some final words. So I will just look around for people who would like to say something. Trustee Kurzman, you took it off. If you've got more to say, I'll certainly yield the floor to you right now.
Yeah, I'd just like to summarize my view. More than anything, I wanted to have the discussion for viewers on Channel 6 and for those in the room, and to hear thoughts directly from my board colleagues, and that was accomplished. So thank you for that indulgence. I continue to think that the fundamental issue, what we're trying to address, is actually speaks to a strength of our village. And we're blessed to live here in any number of ways, but one of them, first and foremost, is the fantastic schools that we have, both public and private. And who wouldn't want to have access to those? And I do think that one of the fundamental pieces for why somebody isn't living near the school who wants to attend the school, is a matter of lacking affordable housing. And so when it comes to these big picture policy discussions, I just think there needs to be a conversation, and I appreciate that chance to have just a little bit of that here. So thank you for that indulgence.
Okay. Anybody else like to make some closing remarks?
I'll just
Trustee
reaffirm
Sullivan.
what's in the multiple minutes since this came before land use, that I've personally have had a long history with Boys Hope. Family's been part of that. I was on their board and support the organization. I've gone to school with the kids. So I think obviously very highly of Boys Hope, Girls Hope, but clear of conflict on this because I view this as an ordinance for the village that I would easily support, whether it's Boys Hope or anybody else that forms something very similar. So I was clear of conscience on that, and as I think this is an opportunity for us to be more welcoming to these types of organizations. And the good news is it'll be tested. It's going to come down to It has to be accredited by either a state or federal agency, and it's going to come down to a neighborhood that's going to be able to say, does this fit in my neighborhood and follow our special use standards? And it'll give an opportunity, as Mr. Canning said, for the zoning board to opine and us as the board to issue a final vote. So I can support this change to our, or this enhancement to our ordinance.
Anybody else? Okay. It's been moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, please call the roll on the motion.
Trustee Wolf?
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan?
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett?
Aye.
Trustee Dodd?
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman?
No.
Trustee Pierce?
Aye.
President Blinsky?
Aye. So motion carries. The ordinance has been adopted. Back to Trustee Pierce.
The next item is item 3.11. I move we grant a request for 156.76 square foot front yard impervious surface coverage variation to permit the widening of the existing driveway on a legal non-conforming structure in accordance with the plans as revised for the property at 514 Knox.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. Trustee Kurzman, and once again, I will turn the floor over to you. You asked for this to be removed from the consent agenda.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. President. And probably some of my questions will go to Mr. Adler, if not the applicant, but I think probably Mr. Adler would be able to handle the questions. And I think one of my concerns that made me want to have a conversation is just feedback I get from a lot of folks are just about a matter of consistency on driveways. And so, I think some people wonder why they're pinched and others not. I found this case really interesting walking the street, seeing 2-car garages, 1-car garages, 0-car garages, wraparounds, driveways so short that cars parked in the driveway would go into the sidewalk, whereas the applicant here, their cars do not go into the sidewalk. There's just a lot of secret sauce, and Land Use Committee folks, I'm sure, are quite adept in it. I do not sit on that committee, but try to study from my seat. But I wonder if you could kind of walk us through some of the variables that go into driveway matters.
Sure. I think one of the I think sometimes people will notice that somebody has a driveway that's obviously over the 30% requirement, the front yard impervious surface coverage requirement we have. And that's because we do allow exact replacement of existing driveways. So if a driveway exists and a sidewalk exists, as long as you replace it in an exact fashion, we allow that. That's permitted. So there are instances in neighborhoods where you might have somebody who has something that's 40 or 50% because that's how it's existed. A lot of times you'll see the narrower driveways or the driveways that taper down on new homes because they come in, there might be a larger driveway, but we have to tell them, no, you can't have give you an example. If you've got a 50-foot wide lot and you're limited to 30%, that's going to be a 15-foot wide driveway. That's all you could do without a sidewalk, and you're at 30%. So in that case, you would have to make it narrower at the sidewalk, wider at presumably a 16-foot garage door, and then hopefully get enough to get your sidewalk into your home. Now, you could get a little bit more width by pushing the house farther back, so there's a portion of the driveway that doesn't fall in the required front yard. If you have a required front yard of 25 feet and the house is set back 40 feet, you're going to have 15 feet where you could have your driveway being 20 feet wide because it's not falling within that required front yard.
But let me interrupt you. The reality is we didn't always limit impervious surface in the front yard, and so people who built these huge driveways, it was before there was zoning code restrictions on it.
Correct.
Which is why the new houses have to live with our code. The old houses, we permit exact replacements.
Right, correct.
Yeah.
And sometimes people don't realize that their neighbor might have their neighbor's property might be 10 feet wider, and if it is, they're going to be permitted a larger driveway, and than one would be on a lot that's less than width.
And the key restrictor here is 30% impervious surface in the front yard.
Correct.
And this house, due to the fact that it's pushed up towards the street, some of the house is actually counting as part of the impervious surface.
Right. This is a block where the required front yard setback's 28 feet, and the house is a little bit closer than 25 feet. So you do have a portion of the house that falls within that required front yard. So it's counting against the impervious surface.
This is one that came before the zoning board, and they modified it, or they reduced it at the meeting of the zoning board.
They did. I believe it was, and the applicant could correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it was 22 feet wide, and they reduced it to 20 feet wide.
Which was a foot. Instead of 2 feet on each side, it was 1 foot on each side.
Yeah.
And it sort of straightened it out as opposed to sort of the bend. Is that is that the right case? I mean, sometimes you have
that was the
case
right case.
case merge with. We had a lot of zoning cases this week.
Yes.
Of course.
Yeah, so in terms of how, I'm trying to get into the thought process of the zoning board, in addition to what I see on paper with them, but when you think about an applicant's hardship or otherwise, it's predicated, I'm guessing, but tell me if I'm wrong, on the use of the garage.
I believe that.
So like if you're in the garage and you can't get out of the garage, then because there's a pinch or you have to make a turn or a bend or something, but it's about using the garage as a garage.
Well, I think, actually, if I may, Mr. Adler, I mean, I think each individual zoning board member, just as each individual member of this village board, has their own sort of perspective on what hardship is. And different people may in their head have thought different things. And it is hard when you're just reading the minutes, because it's not every word. You can always go back to the tape. But hardship, Mr. Stein, there's no, hardship isn't codified that in the zoning code.
Right, I believe I've said here, a hardship is what you guys believe a hardship is.
Yeah.
So it is not a codified term. It is meant to be somewhat left to the legislative process.
Right, so some members of the board might have said it was a hardship because of the siting of the house. Some members of the board might have said it was a hardship because of the size of the garage. Some members might have said it's a hardship because, you should be able to have, it's a reasonable request to have a full driveway as opposed to that's, there is no law. There is no, here's how the hardship is
no black and
defined
white,
in
right.
this instance, or frankly, in any instance, right?
That's very true.
Yeah, okay.
So I'm not sure if this is for Mr. Adler or for the applicant, but do you know, so currently the driveway is wider at the garage, it bows in like an hourglass and then is wider at the street. Do we know why that is shaped that way and it's not just a straight asphalt or a straight driveway?
What I'm guessing is, and the applicant can answer this, but to come closer to meeting the requirements, that's typically where you see it wider at the garage to be the width of the garage door and the narrower at the sidewalk, but I'm not sure if that's the case in this instance, so might need to ask the applicant.
Does this request of a foot on each side, does that essentially fill in where it bows, or does that extend it beyond the bow?
It fills in, and I could actually pull the plan up if we want.
Actually, it's 22.21 feet for the width of the garage, so I believe it would be a little less than that full width, because it's...
Right. They're actually showing a small portion of the driveway that exists adjacent to the garage being removed, because, as Trustee Wolf said, it's currently 22 feet wide, so you've got a little triangular pieces where it's being removed on each side, and then it's filling in the bows going down to the sidewalk.
So, okay, so the ask was the original ask was, okay, I've got the top of the hourglass and I'm going straight down.
Correct.
And what ended up happening is you move in a little bit, so you lose those little pieces.
Small portions.
Yeah, okay.
Right.
Okay, I'm not sure I caught that in reading it.
Actually, so we'll still have a little bit of a bow to it? Is that what we're saying?
No, no.
Okay.
You're right. What's happening is it's going to be uniform 20 feet from the garage door down to the sidewalk. Is what's being proposed.
Which is basically the garage door.
Right to the
In
garage.
this case.
So they'll be able to pull a car out. I mean, the hardship is, in my opinion, they're just gonna have to pull in and out. When they step out of their car, if they park in there, they're gonna be stepping in grass. Out of the driver's side if you're pulling up to the left side, or passenger side if you're up the right side. 2 cars.
And if they're like me, where backing up is a bit of a challenge, they'll just have to back up a little more carefully.
Or drive on the grass.
Or drive on the grass. That's another option.
Okay, so questions for Mr. Adler? Does anybody have questions for the applicant? We can have the applicant come up.
Yes, I have a question.
Okay, would the applicant approach, please? Welcome.
I'm ready for questions.
Good. Trustee Dodd.
Yeah, hi. Thanks for coming tonight. The question I had was, I obviously read the minutes from the zoning board, but anytime we look at allowing a variance, we always look at the standards, and one of the things we look at is the hardship. And so I'd like to just understand from you, what is, or hear from you, what is the hardship that you feel is necessary such that you need to request a variance here? Because I'm not quite, and specifically I'd like to just you to address how are you using the garage today as well, and in terms of needing a wider driveway in order to get both cars there.
So first of all, it's a 16-foot gate. So on both sides, when I'm driving out of the garage, the driveway right now is like 15 feet wide. So I'm driving on a grass on both sides, and there's no way you can get straight in the garage and open the doors. So at least I have to leave one car on the driveway and then just move back on the grass on one car. It's a little bit of a hassle trying with 2 cars to go in and out. So if I can have a little bit wider so I don't have to park on the grass, and I can leave one car on the side and just go back and forth with one car. It's just going to be 1 foot on one side. So right now it's going to be 20. So it's basically 1.5 on the side. It's like 16. So 1 on the side, 1 foot on the side, 1 foot on the other side. And we're just going straight. We're cutting the corners where it's 22. And it's going to be straight instead of both like it is right now. It's going to give me a little bit more room so I can go in and out without parking on the grass.
Okay, so the plan you're proposing then, you would have 1 car in the garage and 1 car on the driveway?
Basically, yes. Sometimes I have both cars on the driveway during the day.
Okay.
When we go back and forth. And especially in the winter, 1 car will be definitely in the garage. The car with my wife's car.
You could put 2 cars in the garage.
I can, but I'm not able to open the doors. Unless I have 1 car in the garage, then 1 car parked on the grass, and then it's a little bit of a hassle. And I have to redo the driveway anyways, because it's in bad shape. So I was thinking, since I'm doing something, at least if I could get a foot on the side and a foot on the other side would be best for me.
Okay. I have a question that'll probably make your life more difficult, but I'll ask it. If you widen the driveway, at the same time, could you somehow change the sidewalk so that we really don't have the variation issue? In other words, what you put into the driveway, can you take out of your sidewalk?
Am I allowed to take the sidewalk?
I don't think you mean the sidewalk, not the public sidewalk.
No. I'm talking about his sidewalk that's in the
He's
front
talking about
yard.
the walkway up from your driveway to your house.
That's in his front yard.
Yeah, he's talking about
Oh,
that.
I see.
You can't take our sidewalk.
I can't take it. I can't take it unless I'm going to walk on the grass. There is I got a sidewalk from the driveway into the house, and there's another one going to the back of the house. I kind of need it because otherwise I'll have to go around with the garbage cans.
Let me ask John, is that,
I think the question is,
About-
in the front yard, you've got that sidewalk. Would you be able to eliminate that, thus reducing the variation, and then use, when people come visit, they would walk up on the driveway in this front sidewalk? But I think that, Trustee Pierce, you're talking about the portion of sidewalk that falls within the required front yard.
yes, that's obviously, I don't want to,
So that portion, not this, but what falls within that.
There's a gate going in the back on the side of the house.
Right over here,
Over here.
not this.
This portion here?
This is Knox here.
I see this portion here.
Exactly. So then if you remove that, then the variation goes down slightly. Then it's almost, it might not be a wash, but then you're close to what you have there currently.
I could remove that. I mean, if I have to, I can get rid of it and just put grass.
you know, is that reasonable, John, in terms of, or is it a crazy thought?
It's something we've seen before. We had one where we limited somebody what else they could do on their property because they went over the impervious surface in the front yard. So, I think that if the idea is to reduce the variation, in this case, not to say that the sidewalk shouldn't be in that location, but if you look at the survey, it's sort of an unusual location for a sidewalk. And a lot of people do have their sidewalk as a part of their driveway. I mean, in this case, the applicant could do something different on that side, maybe in brick, so it appears to be the main sidewalk, so people know to walk up that.
But to some extent, to your point about it being an unusual sidewalk, you could also argue that that's part of the hardship, that I've got this sidewalk here that, I didn't put in and, came with the house, and you're asking me to take it up when I didn't put it in.
If you have the cars parked on the driveway, there won't be sidewalk to come in the house anymore.
Right, so this is the sidewalk that connects to the main sidewalk at Knox, and otherwise you're walking out. I mean, people have that, I have that, where you have to walk up my driveway to get to my porch, but.
Right.
But we can, when we talk about it, we can see what the collective temperature of the board is on that.
Okay.
Other questions for the applicant?
No.
Okay. You can have a seat, don't go far. So is there any member of the audience who would like to be heard on this matter? Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. Do we want to have some discussion here? The trustees on the right all have questions and stuff, so what are your thoughts? What are you thinking? I'll open it up to you guys first.
So thank you. I mean, what's challenging about this is it's such a small request that, I hate myself for even, doing it. But I think what drives a lot of residents crazy is a perceived lack of consistency when you walk around neighborhoods about how driveways come to be. So,
but a lot of that was before the zoning code was created.
Yes, and if that is the totality of the answer to that, then the public should know that. And I'm not sure it always is the totality of the answer, but I think it's a lot. So your point's really well taken. So, I don't have gusto in trying to impede a common sense driveway situation. I just think that, these are literally a dime a dozen, and we kind of need to have our policy ducks in a row so that people can understand it. And so I think some of our discussion does that. I think you made a great point there, Mr. President. That's part of it. But that was my sense in bringing it up. I don't necessarily want to be hard-nosed on this, but it speaks to something that's just out there. And so, anyhow,
fair enough.
Those are my thoughts.
Okay. Trustee Pierce, Trustee Dodd?
I kind of struggled with this, but I'll support the request. I think at the zoning board, he did whittle down the request. I think the location of the house is kind of driving some of the hardship where he gets penalized, where part of the front yard coverage is part of the house. It's a nominal request, and yeah, I'll support it.
So I think I have a question to the rest of you trustees, just to clarify for me. So if he's parking one car in the garage and one car on the driveway, does he need this amount of space to get his cars out of the garage as well as out of the driveway?
The question is, so if you got a car in like this, and you can't go straight back, and you got to cut it at some point.
But I thought our standard width of what we thought most driveways would be was 22 feet? No?
Right, but at the center, it's not 22 feet, right?
It's 20.
It's 22 up at the top.
Top, right in the center,
But we're adding,
Where it bows in.
yeah, so I think that's the question of the bow.
Okay.
And, I used to have a one-car garage where we couldn't get a car in and open the door, which we
Right.
expanded, now we can. And by the way, it's my wife's car also in the winter that gets that spot.
Yeah, so that might.
Any further discussion, Trustee Wolf?
Yeah, I think it's been an interesting conversation, but I think part of it is, this house was built before the zoning code was the way it is now, and things were built different ways, and it seems to me that it's very reasonable to have the proposed driveway width, and also it was worked out with the zoning board. That I always say, and I will say that again here, I don't like to go against the zoning board unless something has really changed, and I think they got it right. They worked with you, the applicant, to narrow the driveway, and I think it's a very reasonable compromise. I think it is good to look closely at permeable surface, but I think this is a really good solution here.
Trustee Plunkett?
I think if our standard is to replace the existing walk, I think the existing surface, I think this is pretty close. I mean, it seems silly to pave over the bow, and they are eliminating some asphalt, at least 4 feet of asphalt, more than 4 feet of asphalt by the garage. So I really think that if you think of this in the whole, they're pretty much just replacing the existing driveway, a foot wider here, 2 feet less here, but on the whole, it's pretty much the same thing.
And I'm going to say Trustee Wolf said what I was going to say, so.
I'm fine with this.
Okay. So, there's no comments about it coming with a negative recommendation, no further discussion. Madam Clerk, please call the roll on the motion.
Trustee Wolf?
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan?
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett?
Aye.
Trustee Dodd?
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman?
Aye.
Trustee Pierce?
Aye.
President Blinsky?
Aye. The motion carries. The request has been approved. And the ordinance adopted, I guess. Okay. Trustee Pierce.
Things were so much easier with paper.
That's why I always have one with me here, too.
Okay, item 3.15. I move approval of a request for a special use for a medical clinic to permit a pediatric center in accordance with the plan submitted and condition. The use shall run with the use per ordinance 2018-067 for the property at 3232 Lake Avenue, Unit 330.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. This time, Trustee Sullivan, you requested this one be removed from the consent agenda, so I know Kathy Routledge in the front row. She's nodded like, oh my gosh, that's the third one, I know. So, Trustee Sullivan, this is a record, I believe, for me, sitting in the middle here for 3 items removed from consent, so.
Look, I wanted this removed. I appreciate all of the effort that's gone into this, but obviously with the focus of Carson's going bankrupt and what's going to happen to Eden's Plaza, which is an entry point and a major visibility for Wilmette, I didn't think this was one that could just easily go by on consent without a little bit of discussion of understanding what the plan is from the landlord. I'd also like to know, and I've talked to staff, of that this is the best we can do and hear why that is. I think that's the right thing to do for the residents because we get a lot of questions from the residents. What's going to replace it? And we're about to possibly approve something that's going to fill a space that was contributing X dollars in taxes to nothing. Why is that the best we can do? And so I'd like to understand what this is. And I'm going to compare it a little bit to Loyola that came before us a couple years ago very quickly with a case, and we sent them back to come up with a strategic plan, which I think they did, and it worked out well with the neighbors. It was only in February that Carson's announced they were going bankrupt, and now we're filling this space. So this, to me, seemed very fast to come up with this as an occupant. And to me, it seems that this is good for the landlord, but why is this good for the residents? And so I'd like to just understand and have a little discussion on that.
So I guess I'd ask the applicant to come forward. Landlord and tenant, yes.
And we have a tenant, too, if we need.
Okay.
Perfect. I'm Bob Fake. This is Paul Fitzpatrick. We're with Lebanese Partners. We're here on behalf of Eden's Plaza LLC, the owner. The same group, by the way, 25 years of operating this shopping center and working with the staff, and I will take a moment. I know this seems sudden, but we've been discussing this with staff for over a year because Carson's going bankrupt was not a secret to anybody. You asked a question that we asked ourselves. The real question is why? Vacancy breeds decay and more vacancy. Everybody's driving around, going shopping, going to different shopping centers, see what's going on. There's been it's not just Eden's Plaza, there's shopping centers all across the country that have been impacted by the constriction of retail, specifically big box retailers and more specifically two-story retailers. We've spent the past year talking to tenants about this space. Two-story retail, big box retail is the hardest thing to replace. What we don't want to see happen to Eden's Plaza is the market get a sense that we've lost Carson's and we're going to go into a state of decay. We're going to have more vacancy. Retailers have a choice today, and they're going to go where the energy is. If they think that you're going the wrong direction, they don't have to locate with you. Worse yet, they don't have to stay with you when their leases come up. We've been very fortunate. We're running at about, if you included the department store, we're running at less than a 5% vacancy rate. We had a problem. We lost Borders some time ago. We were able to replace Borders with Walgreens and a Sports Authority concept that subsequently went bankrupt. We had a problem on the north end. We got creative on the north end some time ago and worked with staff, and we put in Big Blue Swim School, which is not a typical retailer, but the traffic they drove allowed us to lease up the north end. We think this is the same thing. We think with North Shore, and most particularly, it's not any office use. And by the way, the only special use is on the first floor. The second floor is permitted. North Shore is a first-in-class provider of health services with a long history in the village also. That traffic will help our tenants. People that come there will stop at the restaurants, will stop at the drugstore, probably most particularly, but certainly shop. We're committed long-term to retail. We really believe in retail for the center, for the future, and not for the future the next year, for the next 25 years. Retail's changing. The center's going to look a little different. But yeah, your focus is on the department store where it should. We think we are too. We believe there are some larger format retailers that make perfect sense there. And there'll be other uses there probably on top of that. But the worst thing that we believe we can do is not take advantage of the opportunity that we have with North Shore right now. We need to prove to the marketplace, to our tenants who are rolling over, they've already called, what are you going to do? When we tell them North Shore is coming, that's nice to hear. They know the traffic's there. The worst thing we can do is allow the center to stagnate, have more vacancy, and get the implication that it's decay. We need to create the perception in the marketplace that Eden's Plaza remains the go-to destination on this corridor. So that's the best way I can answer your question, trustee.
Was North Shore the only interested party in this space?
We talked to several retailers, lots of retailers. The two-story part was the big problem. Cutting up the space becomes problematic when you have to start to put the elevator systems through the first floor retailer. There have been other medical uses. We thought that this was the best one. These were the best guys. We like the fact, the pediatric ad, because we think that'll drive the best traffic. So.
Can you give any indication of what's going on with the department store?
Maybe a little early for that.
Well, he brought it up.
Yeah, well.
He brought it up. He opened the door.
I can't tell you anything that you haven't heard. I haven't heard anything that you haven't heard, and we talk all the time on this. So that's as far as I could go. Look forward.
Look, and I think the approach that we're taking here protects the village, and because I think we're in agreement that we want to retain the retail character of the center. We don't want to turn it into an office park. And we're putting some fairly severe restrictions on the landlord to incent them to, get something done with that site. And, we are also making a concession here for the medical, use on the first floor because, look, there are a number of members of the board that remember when we turned down the dentist in the village center who wanted to open right next door to the Valley Lodge because while a pediatric center will drive traffic, you go to your dentist twice a year. You don't go check out what's going on at your dentist's office. And you also tend not to draw from a broader area where with the location right off the expressway and with North Shore's name, you might actually draw sales tax dollars to the businesses that aren't just Wilmette residents going there. So we thought that was a benefit. But on balance, thought it was a good deal where the village was getting some protection that, yes, indeed, we are in agreement that we're going to keep this a retail center because that's good for the community. But at the same time, we can, given, the quality of North Shore and the plan that's out there, we can offer up that concession towards the health of the center. So, and the staff can tell you, I was very difficult on this issue.
I understand that, but again, it's on consent, and as much as we think everybody watches Channel 6 or goes back and watches the replay or reads our minutes, majority of Wilmette's going to wake up one day and see potentially North Shore there and say, what just happened? And as we've also talked about at Committee of the Whole or our budget meetings, we're not going to feel the effect of this for another 12 to 18 months. And so then we're going to have to message and say, okay, we don't have this. So is this
right,
the best we have?
The sales tax dollars you're talking about.
We have that at Plaza del Lago where, we lost Crate and Barrel, and at least the first floor became the CVS and upstairs became the medical. It was lesser of an impact. Here, we are giving up retail.
Right. There's no question there's a concession on our part in that respect. Trustee
Actually, I want to follow up on Trustee Sullivan's question for you. So can you help us understand why the thoughts you had around why North Shore couldn't go just on the second floor and put retail on the first floor like we have in other parts of our community?
We would have had the way we had to cut up the first floor would have denigrated the first floor as a retail space, and we couldn't accommodate their need here. They needed the 34,000 square feet. And to the President's, we truly believe in retail long term. That's why we were willing to work together to come up with the concessions to limit, to expand the restrictions on the balance on the entire space on the first floor going forward. We can't bring you a tenant that doesn't generate retail sales tax, and further, we can't bring you a tenant that's a discounter. We believe in the quality of the center. We want to preserve the quality of the center. So this was a thorough negotiation, but we really We would have liked not to have to make those concessions, but your view of the center meets our view of the center going forward. So we were certainly willing to make those as a good faith. This is a public-private partnership. We got to work together to succeed.
The success of Eden's Plaza is good for the community, okay? And it's not just about sales tax. It's about having a vibrant retail center nearby where the residents can take advantage of the shopping that's there, the convenience that you provide. It's a positive part. A good retail is a positive part of all communities. And we're aligned, but it protects us a little bit. And, so I felt like we could live with it.
But all retail today is adding, all retail centers, major centers are adding multiple uses.
No
today.
question. That's what I do for a living, too. So
This is a majority retail, and it has been for the 25 years, and as long as we've been, this is one of the premier spots in Wilmette.
We believe so, too.
And so, we're taking it from, which is right now a majority retail, to we're lessening that percentage. Because I think the only non-retail, if I can quickly go through, are probably Big Blue and Beal Bank.
Yeah.
So 95% of it is retail, or maybe 90%, whatever. So is this a transition, and are we transitioning the right way, or what? That's why I go back to what is the strategic plan? And I get we have limited rights, they own it, but everybody sees this property. Whether you live in Wilmette or you drive the Edens, this is it.
And to some extent, until the main Carson's department store has been developed, we are dictating what their strategic plan is, which is restaurant retail. That is your strategic plan until we get that in order. And look, there's a lot of moving parts. It's not completely in your control. It's certainly not in our control.
We're trying to work together through the process.
Exactly. And
I get there's limited options, but whatever you put in the department store might have an impact negatively on the other places.
That's true. But the key here, and it's very complicated. People may not know, I'm sure the board members know, but residents may not know that the land under the Carson's department store, as well as much of the parking lot, is actually not owned by Eden's Plaza LLC or by 11 East. It's owned by Carson's, which is in bankruptcy. And so the bankruptcy estate is in the process of auctioning off that property. And that's another moving part that comes into all of this stuff. Now, you have some rights, as I understand it.
We believe that everybody that calls them calls us.
Right.
Because we have some rights.
That complication that you just talked about, that's why, that was my first reason why pulling it off consent, because I think we as the board represent the residents to make sure we understand what levers we can pull, and
I think your staff pulled them.
Yeah, no, look, that's the point.
I think the people in this room might, but I think, again, there's.
I think, full disclosure, I think that's a good.
Right. So I think Eden's should not be on consent. That's why I pulled it.
Okay. Fair enough.
Appreciate your efforts.
So,
thank you.
Can you talk about how the negotiations, or at least,
well, let me first, the trustees, question for the applicant while they're here. We can ask them to sit down if there are no more questions for them, and you can ask staff questions, including Mr. Adler and Mr. Brayman, who are both involved, I believe, in the negotiations. Okay, so you can have a seat. Thank you. Don't go far. Mr. Brayman?
Sure. As the applicant noted, we've been meeting with them, for the past, I'd say, 2 years, knowing that the center was going to change and that we had to start planning for the future. And we've been updating the board via memos and managers' notes as some of those meetings have transpired. And our focus from staff's perspective was to ensure the retail character of the center. And really that comes down to right now the department store space. That is 160,000 square feet, 80,000 per floor, and it's the largest sales tax generator at the center. So that's our primary focus, is make sure that space there is replaced either with a large or larger retailer or a hotel, both significant revenue generating uses for the village. And when this North Shore medical space came to us, I think, Trustee Sullivan, to your point is, nobody's necessarily excited about medical from a revenue-generating standpoint. But what we did, it was see it as an opportunity for the village to have some leverage to make sure that our long-term plans of retail or hotel at the large site come to fruition. And the conditions really help move us in that direction. So in particular, restricting all other uses to retail or restaurant, as well as restricting dollar stores or resale shops, is a big advantage for the village moving forward, making sure we get that large retail or that hotel space. So if this is approved tonight, staff's perspective is that we're in a much stronger position to see that large retailer, that hotel come to fruition than we are today. And I think that's our ultimate goal, is to make sure we're moving forward, we're working towards that strategic plan of a retail-dominated center.
And go ahead, Trustee Dodd.
I have a follow-up question for you. So one of the things you said was you talked about that this particular space, the Carson space, was the largest sales tax revenue generating in that particular area.
At the center.
In the center. And so is there...
I'm sorry, the department store, not the furniture store.
The department store.
department
Well, I'm
store.
assuming the department store plus the
They're separate businesses, so we look at them separately.
But for this discussion to some degree, because of what we're doing with furniture store, I'm combining both. So I guess the question...
But remember, the property's owned by
two
different entities even.
Understood.
Okay.
But I guess what I'm trying to understand is there an assumption built in, or are we, and we're making that assumption, or is there a financial that's assuming that what goes into these other retail, into this other location actually is going to make up the loss of revenue we're having from these other two areas?
I mean, that's
Because I think that's an important part here in terms of what we're thinking about, which is we can guarantee that they're going to put some retail in there or whatever, but if that retail doesn't make up the sales tax revenue that we're lost, then we're going to actually wish we hadn't done what we did on the...
Well, see, I would say, look, in limiting the resale shops and the dollar stores, that's part of ensuring that you have a retailer that generates the kind of sales that you want.
But is that an assumption built in, or are we...
That's a restriction that was built in.
But separating it out, just so I understand too, I mean, we are talking about the Carson's furniture part.
Yeah,
They
correct.
can put things in without coming before us.
They can put a lot of things in without coming before us that don't generate sales tax.
This seems to be their best option for whatever to meet their financial obligations with some conditions. We're not going, this is really all we can control at this point.
Well, we can control the first floor use, because that's a special use, and we can control the conditions. I think to Trustee
But
Dodd...
what's the list of permitted uses for the first floor? I mean, it's all of these in the memo, right?
Yeah, John can address that.
But this gives us an opportunity. What you're saying is what can go on to the rest of the site, which is the department store, would have to be retail, restaurant, or hotel.
The entire center is going to be restricted to restaurant retail until something happens there that meets the...
Trustee Dodd's point, I think it could be a good restaurant, but it might not make up, it may still be net negative compared to what we're
There
getting
aren't a
from
lot of
Carson's.
restaurants that are that big, I think our goal here, we can't control who owns the property and who they bring in terms of retailer, but if Carson's went into bankruptcy for a reason. Their sales are declining. So as we look at our sales tax receipts over time, those Carson's receipts have declined every year, somewhat significantly. So I can't sit here and say for certain that whatever new user comes is going to do better, but I think it's a reasonable assumption that they will, and it'll also drive a lot more traffic to the center and prop everybody else, and they'll all do better as well. Now, one of the questions that came up was other retail uses or other uses for this space. We don't just outsource our economic development efforts to the landlords or developers. We work at it ourselves, and we reach out to retailers, and we reach out to users we think we'd like to see and try to put them in touch with the landlord. And we did this in this case, and we had at least one user who we know is very interested in Wilmette, very interested in Edens Plaza, who wasn't interested in the two-story space, even though it had their square footage requirements. It's just a very difficult type of space for retailers these days, and that's why we think this is kind of the right course of action moving forward, so that we do focus on retail on the other sites where it's better.
And there's one clarification that I think should be made, is that nothing is restricted here. It just requires a special use process. Again, they have to come back before us. It doesn't mean it's automatically going to be a no.
Right.
It's when we say restricted, I wanna make sure.
You changed it from a permitted use to a special use.
Right.
That's the difference between process and no process.
Right. There is a process. The village will get notice of it, and we would have a discussion as to whether it's appropriate use or not. That's not a permitted use. But again, it's not expressly barred. They have a right to come before us and seek that.
So, Mr. Adler, if I'm reading the memo right, which is for trustees on page 332 of the PDF, they could have, if they had North Shore on the second floor and they had a martial arts studio on the first floor or some other service business that's allowed, we'd have zero sales tax anyways, and they wouldn't have to come talk to us about any approvals.
Correct. You could divide that space into 5, a martial arts studio, yoga studio, Pilates studio, an Orange, you know, there.
Orange Theory is what
Orange
you're
Theory.
thinking, yeah.
You could put all of those on the first floor, and they're not coming before you.
And through this ordinance, they would have to come to us for any of those uses at any place in the center until we get to a point where everybody's happy around the retail use of the department store.
Correct, and I think that the fact that the management company for the owner has accepted this shows that they're interested in keeping this being a retail restaurant center, because what is going to happen is if something goes into Carson's that doesn't meet the criteria, if Bed Bath & Beyond leaves or if Fresh Market leaves, what needs to go in there without a special use is going to be retail or restaurant. And that's not the case today. Again, if one of those leaves today and they've got vacancies and they're like, we just need to fill these vacancies, they could go out and get those uses we talked about. They could get a dry cleaners. They could get a hair studio. All those are permitted on the first floor.
Trustee Kurzman.
Yeah, just for discussion, Trustee Sullivan, I appreciate that you pulled it off, and I like how you framed the questions. I just wanted to ask you, you know, when you mentioned how you thought maybe it went fast, from, you know, do we fill this, or do we leave it potentially vacant for a while? I'm just curious if you had, either if it's gut instinct or otherwise, how long might be appropriate before you might want to, you know what I mean? Do you want to hold out longer? Is that part of your thought process, or no?
Well, I had not been privy to any of the negotiations or discussions between staff and the landlord, and so I don't. That's why I asked the question of who else do they look to, and we've heard a lot of we've seen it on the cover of newspapers that it's going out of business, and I'm sure you're getting the same questions I'm getting. What's going in there? No different than I'm getting questions on what's going in Jaguar dealership. Our residents see these things and want to know, and so and I've also been privy to a lot of the rumors that are going around what's going in there, and we could all probably name the various stores and get excited about what might go in there or not. So part of me wanted to really understand, do they have a strategic plan here? I get that, you know, they could put a bunch of nail salons in and break it up into 4 or 5 different sites. I would argue that probably not going to happen realistically, just because they're not going to meet their economic hurdle that they, as owners, want to achieve. That's expensive, but seems like North Shore is paying probably a decent return for them, and I still worry about that. Again, you're driving north on the Edens, you're going to see, you know, Great Escape and North Shore Medical. You're not going to see what was a department store, you know, which is Carson's. And so, you know, and I worry. Again, that's why I asked that. I think this Edens Plaza, which, you know, for the last 25 years has looked the way we've all seen it, but prior to that, I remember what it looked like, and they reinvented themselves. Are we at a turning point where it's going to reinvent itself, and what is it going to look like? Because retail's changing and because the demand's changing. So part of me was selfish enough that, knowing that the owners were here, I was going to take advantage of not hearing rumors and asking them directly, what are they thinking?
Sure. Yeah, no, and I like that you have. I guess I'm curious on your sense. It's
I don't know
the timing
I'm not
timing
real estate.
piece.
I can't say,
the timing piece. Like, is your sense if we held out longer that we could do?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Again, I'm not a real
And look,
estate
I
expert. lend to them,
actually
but
am.
I don't really.
I'm not Steve Leonard, but I do. You know, I do retail for a living as well, and it's tough out there right now. And I think the reality is that Old Orchard's going to change, and you're going to see more entertainment, more service businesses at Old Orchard. You're going to see it here too. And what you just worry about a little bit is, and again, what we're trying to accomplish here, because by the way, the best answer would be, well, let's get resolution to the department store site first. So we can say, we have a bird in the hand, but the reality is that's just not a practical way to approach this problem. And but that was my initial reaction to it. You just don't want the owner of the plaza, whether it's the current owner or a future owner, to throw in the towel.
Yeah, no.
And that's what like, this was tough for me as well, because the initial reaction was, why are we going to approve this? Why are we giving up on retail? And we're not really giving up on retail. We're sort of, in partnership with in my view, in partnership with the landlord, trying to advance this center, maintain the retail character overall, but have this use be a positive to the center overall. So,
This is not what I would want for that site. I mean, that's not my first choice, but again, that's why I asked them, and my hunch is it's probably not the first choice for them either. I can't speak to if it's right to be vacant. I mean, they're the experts. They know real estate better than I do. If, they might be right. If we have a vacancy and it says for lease, that could be a big negative. And we all remember what downtown was like, or Village Center was like, when we had a lot of vacancies. It just was not, it was a depressed place.
Well,
and so, I do argue that.
Think about 4th and Linden for a minute, where we've gotten to the point at 4th and Linden where you're going to really need some sort of transformational destination to sort of spark the 4th and Linden neighborhood again, because I was talking with the owner of the comic book store it was last weekend before he closed, and he said part of the difficulty with being a retailer down there is, at this point in time, he was the last retailer. And comic book stores don't drive a lot of traffic on their own. They tend to pick up the traffic that walks by. But if you think about it for a second, there's some restaurants left, but it's service businesses now down there. And yes, the board approved those service uses, but at the time, it was very credible from the landlords to say, we can't get retail. We've just had 3 retailers go out of business, the grocery store, the hardware store. And so, but we should be talking about this. We should be working with the landlord, and we should be very cautious. And I feel like that's what we've accomplished here.
And I think this is North Shore, this is a pediatric center. It's not just going to serve Wilmette residents. It hopefully will bring in other people that will require attention at this clinic that may shop at Five Guys, may go to Corner Bakery, or, do their grocery shopping at Fresh Market. So one could argue it might actually drive more people to the center and help that. So.
I agree, and being right on the Edens, it will be visible. The parallel that I keep seeing is, I don't know, I think I was on appearance review when Illinois Bone and Joint was approved to go in. It was Garden House of Casual Furniture. George, were you on the board at that point?
No, I was on that one.
Okay.
Well, I was on the zoning board when
anyway,
it was approved.
There were parking
I think you were on
areas.
this board when that one came through, Trustee
Was
Wolf.
I?
Yeah,
Was I?
It was
Okay.
zoning,
Okay.
we sent it up to you.
Okay. But anyway, that was one that it was a retail place that closed. It was one of my favorite retail places. I love that place, but it closed. And the decision was to, Illinois Bone and Joint wanted to be there, and they said, if you don't approve us, we're going to Evanston. I think it's a real asset to the community. And I know for a fact that people go there and then they go have lunch afterwards.
Right.
So going back to your question, I pulled it off of consent just to have this conversation and to take advantage of the owners who are here and obviously committed to Wilmette. And I trust that they would rather have this occupied than vacant and try and hold out for something that I might want, which may be wrong for the residents. And so that's why I asked Mr. Brayman more about the negotiations. I just haven't been privy to those conversations.
Other questions for any of the staff? And we'll give everybody a chance to make their last comments as well, of course. Trustee Dodd?
So I thought what Trustee Sullivan brought up earlier about just kind of a strategic plan for this particular area. And I guess I'd ask, given that what we see is happening in places like Northbrook Court and places like Old Orchard and things like that, what makes us think we don't have to really revisit this as a retail center? And maybe it should be a hotel or restaurants or whatever, and because it's going to be really hard for retail to be successful there. And maybe that's something we really need to, as a board, be thinking about. And thinking about the impact it's going to have to the services we're providing to our residents and how we pay for those services. So I'm just kind of asking, the question to Mike and others who are part of this negotiations about, how we got to the place where we feel like retail can still be fairly successful in this location.
Well, I don't think we're ready to give up on that yet. So I think we need to do everything we can to make sure retail is the #1 focus. And if we ever get to the point where we don't think we can do that, then we can reevaluate those other uses. But a hotel use, I think, is an acceptable use to the village and would be revenue generating. It would be a boon to all the retailers there. So a retail or hotel is our primary focus. It's a great location on the highway, and it attracts customers outside of just Wilmette. And all of our businesses need customers from more than just the 27,000 folks who live in town here to be able to survive and thrive. So it's the right location for retail. It's Class A space. It's the right type of space. It's the right type of landlord and management company. So I think we're comfortable that we're going to give it the best shot we can to get retail and hotel. And if that falls through, then we can reevaluate at that time.
Okay, so this is probably just an ignorant question here, which is, do you generally have hotels in also where there's retail like that? Okay, that's...
Yeah, that's actually very, you
Okay.
guys can nod back there, but I know that
Okay,
from
I'm
experience.
just...
Yeah, it's becoming more common actually where, now this may change because some of these big, huge destination malls are going to change, but there's lots of hotels that end up being built around. Look, for example,
Right at
Old Orchard. Now, they're not right on the property.
Not
'cause
on the
there's no-
same property,
But there's no
though.
room there.
Yeah.
That's why they're not on the same property, because there's no room. It's all built out. So.
No, okay, I guess,
And just as a follow-up to
Okay.
Trustee Dodd, the fact that the landlord is willing to agree to pretty tough conditions, I would sense, even though, I think they also feel that retail is viable, as a goal. So that, to me, is encouraging. Not only staff feels that, but so does...
It's more important that the landlord feels it.
Right.
Yes.
Exactly.
Okay. First off, any other questions for the applicant, for staff? Mr. Adler, Mr. Bremen? Mr. Stein's been left out on this one. Any
fine with
questions for
that.
him? Okay. I'll ask if there are any members of the audience who would like to be heard on this matter. I see a show of hands. Okay. So it's been moved and seconded. We've had a healthy discussion, but I will, if anyone wants to make a couple of closing comments, please let me know, and I will recognize you, and you can make those comments. Trustee Plunkett.
Well, just briefly, considering that, what's going to happen to Carson's is probably the number one question that I get asked, I think it's good that we've had this initial discussion, because I think, if people read the paper tomorrow and they see Carson's, they might think that we're talking about the department store.
Right, so
and not the
newspaper
furniture
folks,
store.
Carson's Furniture Store. It's the furniture store.
Which, most of us, if you've ever been in, was always pretty empty. And, you probably had 3 or 4 salespeople jumping on you the second you walked in the door. And I think, around the corner in that tucked away area, I think that a pediatric healthcare facility, that might be a good location. It kind of adds to the family character that is already Eden's Plaza, with the Big Blue Swim School and the Kid Snips and the eating establishments and, even the Walgreens. I can see that as a family area. So I'm kind of hoping that this adds to that, and that will help us, attract something to the Carson's retail store that will be no longer, that, will be something that adds to the character of our community.
Thank you, Trustee Plunkett.
I just think that the conditions that are part of this are really fantastic. And I think this is a great, it's really, like was said, the public-private partnership. It's really a great plan for the future.
Trustee Kurzman.
So I appreciate all the questions that Trustee Sullivan has raised, and I think for me, in addition to seeing on paper what the conditions are, to have the owners here was very helpful to me. It shows the partnership that's taking place, and so I feel very encouraged by that. And I think that for me was and you know what? I think Trustee Plunkett, you made some great points there. I'm going to second those as well.
I'll just quickly say that, again, it is in our community's interest to have a healthy Eden's Plaza. And it's great that we're aligned. But the conditions ensure that we're aligned and that we remain aligned in the goals for the center. And I think, I think on balance, that makes this a good deal for the village and frankly, a good deal for the landlord and hopefully a very good deal for North Shore as well. So, a win-win-win, cliche a little bit, but, fingers crossed on the future as well, because there's more things to come. This is just Act One post the Carsons, the Bonton bankruptcy. So,
Mr. Mayor, just, sorry.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, just so we're clear, we are voting on the, there's no motion needed, but it's the ordinance that was provided in the additional agenda material.
Right. So it's, there was, the trustees received, and there was additional agenda material posted. It had some asks from the landlord, which seemed very reasonable to me, certainly, and so it's a slightly marked up version from what was in Friday's packet. And everybody's just, thank you for pointing that out, just to make sure everybody was aware. Trustee Sullivan, you look like you were about to...
I made my points plenty of times when we talked, and I was disappointed, one, this was on consent, and my initial read was disappointed that this was going to be the first tenant, just because, again, I was hoping for more, I think everybody was, but to the applicant's point, and I think to Mr. Brayman and the team that, have negotiated this for the better, this is a good first step. I have confidence this is a good first step for what's going to happen at Edens Plaza. So, and I do believe that they're committed to making this, continuing to be a good partner for the village within Edens Plaza. And it has been. It's been, it's fun to see it crowded and some vibrancy when it gets busy, so.
Any further comments? Okay, so again, it's been moved and seconded. Madam Clerk, please call the roll on the motion.
Trustee Wolf?
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan?
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett?
Aye.
Trustee Dodd?
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman?
Aye.
Trustee Pierce?
Aye.
President Blinsky?
Aye. So the motion carries. The request has been approved and the ordinance has been adopted. Thank you, gentlemen. You're not done yet, Trustee Pierce.
Okay, I now move we grant a request for a 322.46 square foot front yard impervious surface coverage variation to permit the retention of a front walk on a legal non-conforming structure in accordance with the plan submitted for the property at 241 Kilpatrick Avenue.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
All right, it's been moved and seconded. This item comes to us with a negative recommendation from the Zoning Board of Appeals, so it will need 5 votes tonight to overturn the recommendation of the Zoning Board. As we have been doing with applications that have a negative recommendation, I'll ask Mr. Adler to come forward and just, summarize the zoning issues for us. Trying to get something on the screen?
Yeah.
Okay. There we go.
As was stated, this is a 322.46 square foot front yard impervious surface coverage variation. In this case, it's permit the retention of a front sidewalk at 241 Kilpatrick Avenue. You see in the materials, there was a permit that was issued for a driveway. The applicant has a driveway that goes to a below-grade garage. They got a permit to replace that driveway and to repair the retaining wall. At that time, evidently the applicant talked to their landscaper about the fact that the landscaper felt that the impervious surface was being slightly reduced if they would remove the existing southern walk and make a larger walk in front of the home. Staff did indicate to the applicant that we weren't sure if that was true, but regardless, a variation would be necessary. The applicant did go and have the front walk poured, so it is in. The question for you is, does this meet the standards of review? If yes, you could grant the variation request and the sidewalk remains. If yes, you could approve the variation request and seek a fine. In this case, there were two offenses, one doing work without a permit, one violating the zoning code, and typically you would get $750 per offense for work without a permit, and then the sidewalk would remain. If no, the sidewalk is removed and the old walk that was on the south could be reinstalled. A permit would be required for that. Or if no, you could remand the case back to the zoning board to reduce the scope of the request. We've talked about the standards. I won't leave them up there long, but this is what needs to be met for the variation to be granted. What we also did new this board meeting is in cases where there's a negative recommendation, moving the findings of fact to be, I believe it's on the third page, because that is the zoning board's take on.
And I'll read those as well, so we
Okay.
can leave those up, but I'll read those to the applicant. So.
Then just really quickly, the village did a flyover in spring of 2018. This shows the pre-condition.
Actually, would you back up, though?
Yep.
So the dark spot between the driveway and the sidewalk was some bushes, landscaping that was in there, and that's the part that's been filled in.
Basically, that's the part that's been filled in.
And then
correct.
the little, if you go towards the bottom, you can see that's the sidewalk that's been removed.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. What you'll also see here, which I'll talk a little bit about, is this is fairly unusual in that the right-of-way gets wider as it approaches. The right-of-way to the north gets wider as it approaches Kilpatrick, and you'll see that in the Plata survey. This was just the calculations. Both engineering took a stab at it and community development did. And the calculations that we came up with, when you look at what was removed, which was approximately 70 square feet, and the front walk being expanded, added 189 square feet. But basically the result was that probably added about 29 square feet. Might be a little bit less. One of the problems we had was that area where the bush is at the where it meets the sidewalk. We don't know exactly what was happening there, but that would only add like 5 square feet, a fairly small amount. What this shows is just the area that we calculated as 90 square feet and 70 square feet, and what the required front yard is. This also shows you how the lot narrows to the front because of that right-of-way widening as it gets closer to Kilpatrick. This shows you Glenview Road, and again, how that right-of-way, which is fairly unusual. Usually when you have a road right-of-way, it doesn't do that, doesn't widen so severely to cause the front of this lot to be 51 feet and the rear to be over 70 feet. That's all I have, if you have any questions.
So questions for Mr. Adler?
Can you go back to the slide which showed us what you were saying are our options? So is one of our options to, in other words, it sounds like the applicant put in 29 feet more. He created more of a nonconformity by 29 feet.
Correct. That's approximately what we came up with.
Yeah.
Can't be.
So
but
if
yes.
he removed 29 feet, the property would go back to the way it was?
Yes.
Okay.
But which would still be non-conforming.
Still be non-conforming.
Would be non-conforming.
Yeah.
The driveway alone, does the driveway alone take up the front yard?
Oh, yeah, the
okay.
driveway. And this is, unlike the previous case where you had the ability to reduce the driveway to, say, 15 feet or 14 feet at the sidewalk, this being a below-grade driveway, you can't. You've got
can't
retaining
change it.
walls. You're not gonna have landscaping between your retaining walls and the strip driveway going down. So this driveway really needs to be that 20 feet in width going down. You can't really make that.
But in the event that the applicant had come and said, look, I'm building a new sidewalk, I'm taking out an old sidewalk, net, let's just say for sake of argument, it was slightly below, so however the dimensions were. Because it's non-conforming today, there would still have to go through the zoning process. It's not just the permitting process.
Correct. If you're changing the location, you have to go through the zoning process. Because let's, for example, say if the sidewalk existed closer to the driveway now and somebody wanted to move it, closer to the neighbor to the south might not want to see that sidewalk installed there. So if there's any change in configuration, even if you're lowering it, if you're over, you go for the variation.
Right.
So can you just go through the history then of that? They came in and asked for the new driveway.
Yep.
That didn't go before zoning because it didn't have to.
Correct.
When they were ripping out and putting the driveway in, they decided to rip out one sidewalk and replaced it with the other walkway, which was bigger, and that's when now, did they come in and ask, can we do this?
They did.
And we said
and
no.
it was explained no, and they felt, I think in part it's because they had the contractor out there, it was framed, and they took a calculated risk, I guess, that.
So we said no, otherwise, or no, but until you go through the permit
Right.
process to expand the permit, which would have required zoning and our approval.
And if you go ahead and do it, you do it at your own risk, and you might be spending money that will be wasted.
Got it.
Trustee Plunkett?
So, Mr. Adler, in the vein that they can replace what's there, even if it's non-conforming, what would have been allowed with that front sidewalk? I mean, it's kind of crooked, it turned, I mean, like, where do you?
And I mean, it wouldn't I wouldn't necessarily make sure that they're following that exact turn. We would want them to have the same square footage, and if it, but it would have to have a very similar look to that. But, one of the problems, because we don't, you could look at the aerial, we don't know exactly how it was. It does seem it was probably a little bit more uniform and swooping than what the survey shows. So we would probably want to see pretty close to what you see there being replaced.
Questions for Mr. Adler?
Had they come in and asked for what they have today with ripping out that, how much more of a variation would they be at? I mean, I know that estimate, but they're going to ask for more coverage than what they have on that picture. Correct? Because what I'm trying to get at is, had they gone about it the right way, I'm trying to guess, would we have approved it?
Right. I think if they had come in and we had a chance to go out and really confirm everything, what we would have suggested to them is if you really want to do this, you should come in with most likely a slight reduction, so the nonconformity is lessened. In this case, you're moving the sidewalk away from the neighbor, so the neighbor might appreciate it. Right. So I think that's what we would have suggested to them, because not that it can't be denied, because what's the hardship or practical difficulty, but if the fact is you're making it slightly more conforming and you're moving the impervious surface away from your neighbor, I think arguably, that they would have a chance.
So that's what I'm trying to guess.
Right.
So this might be a better solution.
Right, and I think you'll hear from the applicant. I believe they truly felt that they were reducing it. I think, and can I stand here and say 100% sure it's 29 square feet? No, but I'm fairly confident that, it's not a reduction, but.
But it's not a reduction. Go back to the front yard slide.
Sorry, the front?
Aerial.
Yeah, no, that one. No, the one with the orange. Yeah. No, the one with the orange that shows the front. Yeah. Okay, so the reason potentially, and we can ask the applicant, but in reading the minutes, I think the applicant was suggesting that the part of the sidewalk that they removed that's not in the orange area would count.
Right.
And it doesn't count in the math, because this is not an overall lot impervious surface. It's impervious surface in the front yard, which is frankly more, this is not really about stormwater. It's more about aesthetic, because you limit it to the front yard. We don't want concrete front yards in Wilmette. That's the point. So if you included the rest of that, you might get pretty close to you're 30 feet.
Right.
But it
Yeah.
doesn't count in our math. That's not the way the zoning ordinance is written. That's not what the code is trying to accomplish. Just as the part of the sidewalk that's by the front door isn't counting either.
Right.
It's just the part between the orange lines.
Good point.
But to Mr. Adler's point, that's when they would have made the case and said, we're ripping
Just-
out all of this on this side of the house.
Right.
Right, and you know, that.
Doesn't count in the math,
In
but-
that case, that might have carried the day as well with the zoning board saying, well, look, I know you're over in the calculated area, but since you're taking out the other stuff and it's net positive, we'd be okay with, it's possible that that's what the zoning board would have said. It's possible that's what the village board would have said if we were asked before the work was done. Trustee Dodd.
So I just want to make sure I understood the last point you were making, President Blinsky. So are we saying that we believe if he came in front of us, that we would have allowed what he's done? Because what I see is that what's in front of us, his particular sidewalk is significantly wider than what's any other sidewalk in the area. So putting it just aside impervious surface for a moment, and just thinking about when we look at these cases, we also look at what's happening within the neighborhood and how it fits in with the neighborhood. This particular sidewalk is significantly wider than what's at least when I drove down that particular road. So I'm not, that's why I guess.
I agree. I think the zoning board would have said to them, hey, can you, instead of making it 7 or 8 feet,
Right.
can you make it 5 feet so it looks better too? I agree with you that probably would have also been a recommendation.
Okay, so that's what I wanted to clarify.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think the zoning board wouldn't have somebody would have tried to shrink that down from what they did.
Right.
That's what I was making.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's what we would have said too if it was in front of us first. Hey, can't you make it a little smaller? Then you actually can get rid of most of your non-conforming issue. Trustee Kurzman.
When I think of other downward sloping driveways, I don't recall such a steep drop-off from the sidewalk. I'm curious whether, just you having seen more than anyone, whether this is unusual in that way.
Well, I think we've seen a couple on the same block that are on the same side of the street, which they do go down pretty far. In this case, the applicant is going to need to install a handrail.
Yeah, that's sort of what I was getting
right,
at.
yeah,
And is that required by ordinance?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. And the applicant had already indicated that.
Yeah,
they were
I saw
gonna do
verbiage to that effect.
I think they want to see what's happening here tonight, obviously, before they go forward with that. But yes, they need to have a handrail. That's a good point.
Any further questions for Mr. Adler?
One.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought.
No, we both had a question.
Okay, go ahead.
Instead of a handrail, is there any such thing as above-ground impervious surface? Like if they installed a big planter box as a railing and also a rail that had, vegetation in there, does that count at all against impervious surface?
It wouldn't count. I think if it retains some rainwater, it would maybe have a positive impact, a positive effect, and it surely would help break up the appearance of what is a fairly wide walk.
So how often do we collect fines? And is $750, is that a deterrent? When I think about the 4 options you've laid out, I think ahead and whether other folks seeing this go, well, I can afford $750.
Well, we collect fines for when there's non-compliance or when someone has done work without a permit, even especially when we told them not to. $750 is the maximum, is what's allowed by our ordinance and by state statute. The minimum is $50, but somewhere in between would be an appropriate
But then
fine.
how did we had a case that was sent to the Land Use Committee to determine a fine. It was south of Lake south of Loyal on the west side of the Express. It was Leamington, was that the street? So what was the process there that we followed? Because that was a bigger fine. It was still, I'm not sure, to Trustee Kurzman's point, it was much of a deterrent.
No,
because the person built a lot of extra house.
And ultimately, I think what ended up, that fine ended up basically being what our surcharge, which doing work without a permit, you get a 50% surcharge. So if your permit is, in that case, I think the permit was $3,000, they paid an extra $1,500. So that was, I think ultimately what the Land Use Committee decided to do was just what the surcharge was, in taking into consideration the individual circumstances and everything related to that. We had another one on Wilmette Avenue where the garage got built slightly. They were over the floor area. You granted it. Again, similar. They had to plant a tree, they had to remove an apron, and then they got the surcharge. And so in those two cases, and in those, one was putting it on a second floor, the other one was building a house too big and putting in a parking pad. So those were arguably things that took a little bit more discussion to try to figure out what sort of penalty we wanted to see. Now, typically if somebody comes in, they don't get a permit, but ultimately it's a conforming request, they just pay the surcharge. What we don't do is issue a ticket to a homeowner to get them in court if they're pursuing compliance. And so that's, the surcharge there is just as a quick way for us to levy a fine and encourage compliance.
And is the $750 in addition to the surcharge, or is that
it can't be
in place of the surcharge?
It absolutely could be in addition to, so the fine would be essentially a penalty. I believe all other fees have been paid in this matter, or is that?
Yes. I mean,
So we talked about
what
that
we
earlier.
would do is there would be a minimal, probably a couple $100 fee for the sidewalk, which they did not pay for, and then the resulting surcharge fine would be $100 to $150. So it wouldn't be a great amount.
And the other thing important to know about the fines is that they got to keep the improvements that they made illegally, where if compliance was, okay, I'll remove it, then I don't think this board or we would want to seek a fine in that situation.
Right, so how often are we collecting fines?
I think the question is surcharge, right?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, we could look. There's we collect the surcharge. There's many times we collect the surcharge. Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Many times?
There's been some big ones, but usually they're relatively small. There are times in which, there a lot of times what we'll see is somebody will do a bathroom or a kitchen without a permit, and it's obvious that they really didn't know. And if they come in immediately and they cooperate, usually we'll just issue the permit.
We also there was the house just west of the fire station on Lake where they had put a bunch of pavers down to make a driveway. We made them rip that out.
Yeah, we made them reduce it. They had to reduce it.
And there was no fine.
Right, in that case, there was no fine. They had to spend to, and actually, that was actually not even put into code, so they had to actually, I think, redo the whole thing, but they had to make it smaller.
They did it on their own without a permit.
They did it on their own without a permit, so.
Well, just to clarify, a lot of those surcharges you were talking about weren't necessarily for things that were non-conforming, that would need a variance. They would have gotten a permit if they asked for a permit.
Right,
Right?
correct.
And they just failed to get a permit in
Correct.
the first place.
Correct, yeah, yep.
Right, like a kitchen remodel where you don't need
And most of them
variance
are. I
for
mean,
it.
most of them are conforming. Most of them are, quite frankly, are interior. They're not additions. I mean, it's very rare, but we've had people do room additions without a permit, and they've received surcharges.
So we've talked about this a couple times, and I don't want to take us off topic on this too much, but we've talked about, do we have a list of kind of non-preferred contractors or, or something that that could be even part of our permit process that indicates, this is a list of non-preferred contractors in our community because they have been known to steer residents in the. This is a separate discussion because
Right,
actually this
right.
particular resident was told not to do it,
Right.
but then he went, or they were told not to do it. Excuse me. So, but the fact that the contractor told them it was okay, I'm just wondering, and maybe we just.
So-
Take this off topic, but I do think it would be nice to have somewhere a list of our non-preferred contractors.
Well, we don't have a list of non-preferred contractors because it would be a defamation issue potentially there, right? So
This
we
is like
don't
the
want to
third
do
time
this.
I've
Yeah,
asked.
the lawyer is always,
It's just like the third time I've asked this question
It
every
is.
time you.
It's the same answer every time, but that's okay. I can repeat it.
At least I'm.
But one of the things that has happened since this was last discussed a couple months ago, adjudication has started, and we have been issuing citations, not necessarily to property owners, but to the contractors themselves. And now they have to come to court and pay a fee. So it is hopefully a deterrent
Got it. Okay.
to contractors not following the law.
So that is an update. See. So I bet I won't ask that again.
I bet you will.
Okay, let's get back on topic here. I don't want to have to pound the gavel, okay? That's okay. All right, so more questions for Mr. Adler? Any more questions for Mr. Stein? Okay. All right, so would the applicant please approach? Okay, welcome. I've got a couple of things to sort of introduce here, and let me just get them up on this. So we've all reviewed the report from the zoning board, and we're familiar with the project, and obviously you can tell from the conversation, we know the work that you did. So while you can talk about that, please focus your comments on addressing the concerns that the zoning board raised. When they made their negative recommendation, they found that your proposal did not meet the standards of review. And Mr. Adler actually had the standards up earlier, and he also had the zoning board's finding of fact, which I'm going to read. And that finding of fact, if you're looking in the PDF, is page 552 of 560. It says, a majority of the Zoning Board of Appeals finds that the request does not meet the variation standards of section 5.4.f of the zoning ordinance. Specifically, there are no conditions of the property that are causing a practical difficulty or particular hardship. The applicant created his own plight by installing the sidewalk without approval and installing a width greater than typically seen. The applicant indicated that safety was a concern but did not provide any information about installing a rail or barrier along the edge of the driveway. The proposed variation may be injurious to other property in the neighborhood, as there is a known flooding issue on that block. The variation, if granted, will alter the essential character of the neighborhood, as a 7-foot wide walk is not consistent with other properties. So that's what the zoning board said. In your remarks, please address their remarks and let us know why we should not agree with the zoning board but should agree with you. So with that, the floor is yours.
Okay, Mr. President. So I'm sorry, maybe I'm going to talk a little bit about this, but first of all, about what the boarding zone said. This is my first time to stand in the front of you, and it's been great to be here, but I have to go through the process. Just the board, I didn't talk about the hardship, which is the last time for the board, or about the water, pretty much that much, because I was thinking when I was going back and forth to the village of Wilmette, dealing with Mrs. Robert, so Lisa, so I didn't get the permits, but I addressed all my file was with her, and I didn't know how the things goes, but I went back after when the boarding zone, they denied my request. So she explained to me, she told me, you have to address your issue, you have to explain to them what's going on, and I told her I was thinking everything they have. That's why I didn't mention even the hardship, which is one of them, which the water on this block. It's the main issue if the flooding.
But, right, I understand that, and I suspect your garage gets it, and that's why you did the work with the pumps and the like. But the focus is the sidewalk.
Exactly, I'm coming to that, Mr. President, because so when I did the sidewalk, and I'm trying to explain to everybody here, I didn't go over the law, or I went to her and I took a verbal, and she told me, you want to take it, go ahead, but you want to take it in your own risk. And the time when I said to the contractor, go ahead and do it, So she told me I was going back and forth. I was thinking this is gonna issue. But before I give the permission to the contractor to do the sidewalk, which is we have the issue right now, I find out the solution for her because I know the zoning board, the code come after that when the house is old, and there is the concrete, it's a little bit over with the driveway itself. And that's why I have a sidewalk. If I can show you here in the picture, if you don't have it, it's a...
You can actually open up see there's a little handle there? You pull that, and you can put it down on that, and then they can project it. Although they got to switch it.
No, flip it over.
The other way.
Other
way.
Towards the ceiling.
The camera's up above you.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Let's see if we can get that on the screen. Okay, so there you go.
So
We zoom
here,
in a
this
little
is
bit
the
on that one.
sidewalk, and this is, I believe it's a good picture for everybody, because the sidewalk we are talking about,
Yep.
and I find out the way I am adding here small amounts of the concrete, this is 3 bushes, only 3 bushes, because it's been old, but it's only 3 from 1 and 2 and 3 right here. And I am the one I took them by myself. It was big roots because they've been old for years and years. So, which is, I talked to Mrs. Lisa, and I think it was good enough for me. But I didn't, again, one more time, I didn't take the law because the guy he took the money, and I am in a hard situation. I couldn't know what I'm going to do. So I took the south side here, which is I'm pointing my finger. I took this concrete right here because she told me the matter you have to count 27 feet from your house right here, which is count. So we take the sidewalk, the south side right here, and each concrete right here, it's 2 feet, 0.7. So all together, only here in the front, it was a 92 square feet, which is covered that the concrete, which is I added right here. That's why I make the decision, and I told him, go ahead and you can do it. But if you want to I took the whole sidewalk, which is for, observe the water and for the neighborhood and everybody. I think it was like a little bit over 300 all the way in the back, which is I don't need that. I use only this entrance, and I use the patio entrance, and I use the garage. That's more than enough for me because it was just extra sidewalk here going to the...
Right, and understand that while that's relevant to the conversation, you still needed a variation because overall, due to your driveway, you're over the limit. So, as we had been talking, there was a chance that had you asked for permission before and sort of outlined what you were going to do, that the zoning board might have approved it. But to Trustee Dodd's point, it's also very likely the zoning board would say, do you need a 7-foot wide sidewalk? Can't you make that a 5-foot wide sidewalk instead of a 7-foot wide sidewalk?
Again, one more time, it's coming only the stairs, so the sidewalk itself right now, it comes like, if I count this morning, it was 6 feet exactly on the sidewalk. But if you added the sidewalk, because I did it...
I paced it off, it was more than 6 feet when I was there over the weekend.
Mr. President, to that, because if you connected with the retaining wall for the driveway, it gives you exactly 7 feet. So,
okay.
Because here of the retaining, there is the wall right here behind the bushes right now. If you count it, but it comes with the... And the reason why, again, I have another picture, I took it, maybe you can show to everybody that I was trying to go a little bit... Yeah, it is a sewer right here, which is on the front immediately. It's old right here, but this is the newest one. It looks new, but it is here. We didn't do any change. So this sewer right here immediately comes on the front of the, it's like between the sewer and the
Is that on the front porch, or where is that?
It's
Are
on
you
the
taking a
front
picture?
of the door. It's right here, exactly. I'm pointing
Okay,
my
okay,
finger.
all right. So at the bottom of the steps, if you will.
The steps, it's 5 feet from the steps. It's right
Okay,
here.
oh, got it, okay, on the sidewalk.
So anything we wanna go narrow or something, it's not gonna look any nice, because it comes in the middle of the sidewalk.
So how does the sewer impact the width of the sidewalk? Is that what you were suggesting, that was the reason why the sidewalk was wider, or you were just saying that the sewer was there?
No, the sewer was there, but that's not unpacked. If I want to go, I was trying to go to the contractor, and I told him make it narrow. When I didn't get the permits, I was trying to connect it right here, and I go narrow right here, like come like 5 feet or whatever. But he told me you cannot do it because you have the sewer right there, and it's gonna look like you have to fight the way from the sewer all the way like 5 or 6 feet, and you make it narrow the other way.
Okay. Questions for the applicant? Trustee Kurzman?
Where does that drain to?
The sewer.
I find it there. I don't have no idea. That's an old sewer right there. It's been there with the building. It's on the survey. It's on the.
Oh, so that wasn't a sewer that was installed. That was an existing sewer pipe.
It was existing there, yes, sir. It's an old sewer.
Questions? Sorry, I've looked down at my page instead.
I don't know if this is relevant to the width of the sidewalk, but I feel like you would have like water runoff from that sidewalk just pouring down into your driveway. You don't have the bushes and the landscaping to catch any water. Has that been an issue? Were you planning any kind of like impervious railing to kind of trap water from rolling off into your driveway?
I'm sorry. I'm trying to do railing only for the safety for the kids after when all this done. But so the guy, what he did right here, if you look, the new one, he do like attachment to the water. It goes straight to the other side here. Okay. So which is approved. When I get this house, it was the closing. I am new to this neighborhood, by the way. Just the May. I have like 2 times flood, but after when he done this job, I don't have no water go to the basement right now. And also for my neighbor, which doesn't cause any harm or anything for all my neighbor, all of them, so there is no harm for anybody. And he solved my problem, So he did my sidewalk right now. You cannot see it, but you feel like the water goes and it goes to the other side of the other side of the grass.
It's gently
attachment,
sloped.
like
It's on a
yes.
pitch. Okay.
Right.
Questions? Okay.
So when you were
Trustee Pierce
doing the sidewalk, down to the east where the public sidewalk is, a couple of us have said the sidewalk is very big. Was there any thought of, I'm still not clear why, other than it just runs off the steps, why you made it so big? Could you have narrowed it down by the public sidewalk and then widened it?
I'm sorry.
So down where the public sidewalk is?
Yes.
Could your sidewalk?
I didn't add anything, sir. If you look to that one, because it was only narrow. If you follow right here, my finger, this is the old one.
Yeah, right.
So, and the front of the stairs, until the last step right here of the stairs, it is a concrete all the way to and the bushes start from here. And it was like a narrow, only like this. And here, I didn't add anything. It was wide like that one. And it close to the wall right here. Because this has never been, before, it was not touched all the way. This landscape, it was coming all the way to the public. It was only like narrow right here, and it stopped right here. And this one, it was being like that, going back with the stairs all the way there. So like, here in the stairs, it was wide, and here by the public, it was wide. And only narrow spots right here, it was like 3 bushes.
So I'd like to, I'm looking at the survey. The survey has one thing. Mr. Adler, could we put back that, can we put the aerial back up? So did you ask them to switch back to the computer? Sorry. I think what you're saying is it was wider at the public sidewalk before. I just want to see the aerial shot of that, and see what it looks like.
unfortunately, the aerial is blocked, well, you'll see.
Oh, by a bush.
Yeah, that's the one area we weren't able to confirm.
So it does, though, at this point, it looks like it's starting to get wider.
Yes.
Does that make sense to people?
Yeah.
All right. Any more questions for the applicant? I think we should talk a little bit then. Okay, have a seat, don't go far. Is there anybody who'd like to be heard on this matter? Okay, I didn't think so, but just wanted to ask. So I guess before we kick into discussion here, I'd like to just sort of take a straw poll on where people are on this. Because we got a bunch of different options. In talking to Mr. Adler, we sort of debated what the issues are. I think we know what the issues are. Sort of curious where people are on this. And then we can sort of decide what we might be able to vote on tonight or not vote on tonight, if there's a path forward or not. So who wants to share some thoughts here? Trustee Dodd, you're looking at me. I bet it didn't sense me to call on you, but Trustee Pierce volunteered, so.
Well, I guess where I'm at on this is I feel like we have to do something, and I'm not sure what it is, but of just granting the variation requested and in effect overturning the zoning board, I would not be in favor of that. What I'm not sure is where to go. Requiring a smaller sidewalk or dealing with this in terms of a fine, I'm not sure. But I feel like just saying okay to the applicant, I'm not in favor of that.
I'm sort of the same mind, and to me, rather than get up here and have a debate about what do you want to do, it's sort of like let the applicant go back and come up with some ideas, and we're not the venue for that. That's the zoning board. So sort of like, if we're not going to approve it, if we can't see a path to approving it, I think you send it back to zoning and tell the applicant to work with staff and figure out something that zoning is going to like, and maybe come to zoning with a couple alternatives even. Now, I don't think that just.
I mean, you were on zoning. I don't see him getting approval on anything.
Well, if he comes back with 30 feet less, and I mean, maybe he can make the argument that, look, I'm below impervious surface. That I'm better off. You should approve this.
I think that's where I'm not sure.
I mean, he can't go back to zoning with the exact same thing and get it approved. He's got to change something.
No, but if you come in with these design as we look at what zoning say, reduce it by 30 feet, they might be able to say that, or 50 feet. They usually come up with a number, and we sort of say, okay, is this as much as reasonable? So my argument is, can the applicant and whoever his contractor work with John and his team to figure out what is reasonable? And in my mind, it's shrink the sidewalk down some portion.
Well, we could do that.
Take out X part, and it's going to be an expense, and pay whatever fine.
We could do that as well. We could come up with what the answer is.
I don't know if we should come up with that, or should he go back and work with staff to say what's reasonable, what's the right width for a sidewalk, what's relatively standard?
It's still going to come back to us.
Come back right to us.
Okay, so instead of remanding it to zoning, you're sort of saying, stay it, have them work with staff and come back with a plan, then just come straight back to us.
I think so.
Now, the difference is, it's still going to be off consent, and we're going to have a debate and all the rest of the stuff.
But we'll make the final decision. I don't know what zoning's going to educate us more than what we already know, what they've done.
Procedure-wise, if we did that, what might that look like? Timing and all that?
Well, you would table it to a particular meeting if you wanted to, or indefinitely and remove it from the table when it was ready to be removed. It's as simple as that, and with direction, obviously, given to staff and the applicant for the path to approval. A referral would be a simple motion tonight to refer back to the zoning board, and on their next meeting, it would be. So.
Well, the question, I guess, is if we're going to do that such that it's just with staff, we need to give them enough guidance as to what we think's acceptable. Otherwise, they're guessing, and then we're either going to say, oh, we agree with staff, or we disagree with staff.
Well, staff said he increased it by 29 feet in terms of the amount of impervious surface, if I recall. So
that's our best estimate.
To me, that seems like a good
standard. So if you can get rid of, just call it 30 feet, round numbers, give us a little bit. If you could get rid of 30, you're okay if you could get rid of 30 feet of 30 square feet of the impervious. And so the other question I think that was in front of us was the sidewalk's wide.
Right.
So that means, are you okay with taking out that but leaving the sidewalk wide?
I feel like that's, I mean, to only remove 30 square feet is a lot of money and a lot of effort for not much of a difference. I mean, if we're only talking about 30 square feet, then leave it as it is, because that's just a waste of resources.
Well, and you could make the argument that, and I'm not making this argument, I'm saying you could make the argument that the rest of the sidewalk that was removed going all the way back to the side of the house more than compensates from a, if the aesthetic issue is 30 feet, the rest of that more than compensates for the stormwater-related element of impervious.
And I guess I would want to understand why, is there a reason to remove that buffer? You know, there's the sidewalk, there's the tree buffer, and there's the driveway. I mean, is there a logical reason to have the sidewalk abut the driveway? I still don't really have an answer for why the buffer was removed. I mean, I can say that aesthetically, it's a look. It's a modern look. You've got a wide walkway. It's a modern-looking house. It's a modern-looking sidewalk. I understand that aesthetically, if that's the reason. I guess I still don't understand
Right.
why. Right.
We can ask the applicant if we want, but, you know, to some extent, why sort of doesn't, you know.
Well, I just what's the logic in removing that buffer zone?
Okay.
That could be a question for the applicant.
Let's keep talking about where we are, and we can call the applicant back up for that.
I'd be up for tabling it, sending it back to staff, and seeing if they could get the sidewalk, I'm going to say within 3.5 feet. What's reasonable and what a normal sized walkway is versus whether it's 6 feet or 7 feet as you marked off. But, I mean, it's a big sidewalk. And yes, I appreciate that it's the trade-off, but they could have minimized this a little bit more in the front on a street that we know that floods.
But again, so
I'd give this.
But what's your requirement? Do you need the sidewalk more narrow, or do you need the 30 feet gone, or do you need both?
I want the sidewalk narrowed.
You want the sidewalk narrower, okay. And you want the sidewalk narrower.
I would agree with Trustee Sullivan, which is I think I would prefer that we don't come up with a solution tonight, that we send it back to staff. We have them make the sidewalk narrower. I would just have, maybe staff could look at, you know, the sidewalks on that particular block and what's the average, you know, width of them, and come up with something, if it's 3 feet or 3.5 feet or whatever, something within that particular, or what's typical within that neighborhood or whatever. They could look at that and give us some recommendation, and that's what I would propose.
So let me ask Mr. Adler the question for a second.
And then they're going to pay. Yes.
Yeah, right. I think that I think there's agreement on that one.
Okay.
So, other than the overall impervious surface coverage question, in our code, do we have any restrictions on the width of sidewalk or anything like that?
No, I guess what I would say is, I mean, typically you'd see between 3 and 5 feet. A public sidewalk, we want to see 5 feet, so 2 people could walk by, side by side. So,
But if you had a garage in the back,
yeah.
So you're not using up all your impervious with your driveway, and you want to have a 10-foot wide sidewalk,
you could do that.
You could do that.
Correct.
It just, in this particular case, because they're over, now we're talking about the width of a sidewalk, you know, and again, they have no choice but to be over given the driveway.
Correct.
So I'm not as hung up, I mean, I agree, it's a different look, but I'm not as hung up on if that's the look that they want, why, you know, is it really that bad? And then if you say it's not, well, then you're back to, then the question becomes, I think Trustee Plunkett hit it on the head. If we're really talking about 30 feet, are we going to make someone jackhammer their sidewalk for 30 feet? I mean, I think these are, I'm not offering an answer in any way, shape, or form, but those are sort of the the logical questions, and then do you give him any credit, if you're worried about stormwater, do you give him any credit for the impervious that he removed along the side of the house? It isn't an easy answer at the end of the day, because there's so many different paths you could go to, and frankly have fairly logical support for it, including saying, look, it's 30 feet. There's no way we would have approved this if it was 2 feet over. We would have told them to make it 2 feet under. And that has logical grounding too. So, I mean, my concern is if we just send it back to staff, we're going to have this debate after the fact. And then there's going to be 2 weeks or 3 weeks that have gone by, and staff is going to guess that it's the narrow or the 30 feet or the whatever.
I mean, if you had just sent it back without this discussion, I would talk to him, get him to reduce it to 5 feet, since that's standard sidewalk width. And so, I mean, that's the best I could probably have come up with, which would have reduced it by, 54 square feet. So that's what I would have suggested for his best chance. I wouldn't have been able to guarantee him, obviously, but...
But from the discussion you've heard tonight, if you reduced it by 54 feet and it was narrower, I think you got at least 4 votes. We haven't heard from everybody, but I think you got at least 4 votes and probably 5 votes that would get it approved. Maybe not, but Trustee Kurzman, I haven't heard from you or Trustee Wolf, so...
So the only place where I've differed, I think, in my mind from comments spoken by my colleagues is I'm challenged to think that a neighborhood, because it has a flooding problem, should be treated differently in terms of its potential for improving the property. That's not to say that I like what took place, but I'm just saying it is salt in the wound of a neighborhood that floods, that folks can't do the sort of things to their homes that folks in other neighborhoods would like to. So I just want to articulate that because I think repressed property values is a real component of our stormwater flooding issues. But I think the part that I'm still trying to get my head around is, and I'm not overly a law and order guy, but we just can't have people rolling the dice with us. So
another excellent point.
So I'm challenged by it. I mean, and this is more visible than, say, the patio on Lawndale that took too much of our time, and my apologies for that. But, we have to sort of get through this in some way that will discourage folks from looking at that calculation and making that decision the way that this resident did. I don't think that's to the good. I like Trustee Dodd's point about, the vendor. They had a role in this too. So I'm grappling with that, but I don't know. I'm not clear on the best path forward. I see good points that you've made about the zoning board, and then I certainly don't want us to negotiate it out here. I don't want that. So I think I can be flexible about the pathway forward, provided that it really creates a discouragement for folks to do this, and doesn't discriminate against a home by virtue of its location in a hard, in a difficult neighborhood with stormwater flooding. That's an onus that's already borne by the residents there. I think that design is, personally, it's kind of scary, but that's not my call. But I do think we need to stop the rolling the dice and seeing how we do with the board type of thing.
And I think everybody agrees with that, too.
I'm not saying take it out just because it's on Kilpatrick River Street. I would say that on a street that doesn't flood. I think this should be reduced. I would have advised that if I were sitting on the zoning board, I would have tried to minimize it then and had it come before us the normal process. And again, I don't care where it is. This is something that had we been given had it followed our appropriate process, which they knew, this would not have been built.
Yeah.
Legally. He built it illegally. It should be. And so now we're trying to figure out how do you minimize it, which is going to cost them, in my mind. That's why I said narrow it and pay the whatever permits. And again, it doesn't matter what street.
So, Trustee Wolf, if you'd like to add to it, I think actually through this process, we have given the applicant and the staff a lot of guidance on what would be acceptable coming back, and we don't have to articulate particularly where everybody, like, okay, well, let's vote on this and that, and would this work, would that work? We've given them a good sense of what's going to happen. But Trustee Wolf, if you'd like to add your thoughts to that, so they have
I'll
all
add a
7 of
couple
our
thoughts.
points of view, that would be helpful.
I want to echo what Trustee Sullivan just said. We're really looking closely at stormwater throughout the whole village. And the last thing we're doing is discriminating against Kilpatrick. I think in some ways, given that we know there's flooding there, I think it's really, really important to look at the impervious surface there. But we're certainly looking at it everywhere else too, because we realize this is a village-wide issue, and we do need to be really, really careful about impervious surface, because it does add up. Wherever it is, it adds up. That said, I think also it's not right to do something without a permit, whatever path forward we take.
Yeah,
It needs to correct that.
Trustee Kurzman, to your point about rolling the dice. So I could make the argument, as I did earlier, that had they followed the process, he might have got exactly what he wanted, because he could have made the argument, I'm going to take out this impervious, I'm going to take out that impervious. Yeah, it's wider, but that's my preference. Net, I'm doing you a positive. And so if they'd gone that path, might have got exactly what he wanted. But what it looks like now is that in rolling the dice, the gamble has cost them what they want because we're not going to approve it. I mean, that's sort of what I'm hearing from. So from the point of view of setting an incentive in place, having to undo work is definitely an incentive. And that appears to be where, sort of the collective point of view is. Certainly there aren't 5 votes, much less, I don't think, a majority of people saying, we're okay with this. So.
Now, we mentioned, sorry.
Go ahead.
I talked to Mr. Adler. If this is something that we could discuss at the land use of what do we do when this stuff happens, if it's a regular contractor. I don't know what we can do. I appreciate what you're saying, Mr. Stein, about, not having a bad list, but there should be something. We issue licenses. We do something. There's got to be something that we can at least discuss.
Yes.
We might not be able to do anything with it, but I think this is a healthy discussion in one of our committees in land use.
And now that we have the adjudication process, we can do it here in-house as opposed to going in front of the Cook County judge, incurring court costs. And at the end of the day, if there was a penalty being paid, if the judge didn't waive it in the first place, all that would probably get chewed up in our costs to the county.
Because I do agree. Yes, the homeowner is responsible for what goes on in the properties, but on the flip side, not everybody understands our process, and I think we do a good job advertising it. But
and we've tried with the website and everything else.
Contractors know they should do the work with a permit, and they should say, you should just check with the village, majority of contractors.
Yeah.
And we know that there are some that don't.
All right, so my sense of Trustee.
So I just had one question about, I know I kind of understand where we're going, and I think I just want to understand if the decision about sending it to staff versus sending it back to zoning. I'm just trying to understand that. And are we trying to send it back to staff because zoning won't understand what we want, or are we trying to save the applicant time? Because I'm a little bit like not trying to, the applicant, I want to be sensitive to them, but they didn't follow our process. And don't we generally, in these situations, actually send it back to zoning when we're looking for a change? And so why are we making an exception
I'll
here?
let you answer, but my view of what making that recommendation was only because zoning is just advisory to us anyways, and to pull apart the case of what we can't see and read their notes. I think this one, we know what the issue is, and so my view is just go back to staff with some guidance. Ultimately, we're the decision makers, so zoning's not going to tell me anything different if that's 3 feet or 5 feet.
In essence, it's not. In essence, I think what you're saying is it may not be complicated enough to warrant another zoning hearing. That we know what the issue is. We know we've sort of given the guidance on what the fix is. So just come back to us with it fixed, and
yeah. And sometimes even on that other case that we approved on Knox, they negotiated to a certain. They reduced it in the zoning, and we still could have said no. We still could have asked for more, but they sort of got it at what it was. Well, in this case, I don't know if they're going to say.
The one reason why you might send it back to zoning is that the zoning board has a habit of, if somebody did something without a permit, they tend to say no matter what and kick it up to us. And so you could kick this back down to them and then have it, and if they fix it, it could come back on consent and we could just, roll through. It's an extra meeting. It's one extra meeting either way. It's either an extra meeting with the zoning board, an extra meeting with us.
2 extra meetings.
Well, but the second meeting would be on, if it got approved, it'd be on consent.
It's a month versus 2 weeks, potentially.
But we're not, but if it comes back on consent, so if we send it back to zoning and it comes back on consent, then it doesn't have to come back in front of us.
Right, that's what I'm
Well, it's
saying.
on
It's an
consent.
easier second. I mean, it comes in front of us, but it
Comes
just.
before- it's on
just
consent.
on consent.
Right.
Trustee Plunkett.
I guess my question is, we certainly don't have 5 votes, but are we saying the only solution here is to eliminate part of the sidewalk? I mean, is there any other bargaining chip? Is staff going to look at anything else? I mean, could the applicant say, this is the aesthetic that I want, and is there anything else that they could give up to have this aesthetic? I mean, I get that it lines up with the front stoop and it goes in a straight line and you've got the retaining wall and the driveway. I mean, are we saying the only thing that staff will, can look at is making this sidewalk smaller, or is there, any other bargaining chip?
Are you suggesting like, a rain garden or something like that, or?
Rain garden, any other
Permeable pavers.
impervious surface that's extraneous? I just don't know. I guess I don't know, I think it's, the applicant needs to sit down at the table and have a discussion and say,
Well,
you know.
I mean, there's 2 elements here. It's the aesthetic and the stormwater side.
Right.
So what you're suggesting is maybe there's a way to balance the aesthetic by tackling the other side or something like that. I don't know. I'm not hearing anything from people that are suggesting that they're willing to trade something off. All I've heard is sidewalk.
Well, I think that's a fair point. If they do something beyond what, just shrinking the sidewalk to 5 feet or taking a foot off of it, but they come back and say, I could make this pavers or reduce something else, then I think it should go to zoning board. If it's something beyond just sort of slicing it off or changing the whole plan.
So does it go back to the zoning board anyways? I mean, it's either narrow, so the problem is we can't, if there's a different plan that comes up, we don't want to hear it unless it's narrowing the sidewalk, it sounds like.
Yeah, I guess.
I mean, we could ask the applicant too, our process is a little arcane, he may not really.
I don't even, well, I mean, we
understand
should ask him
exactly
if
what
he
the heck
knows
we're talking
these-
about.
Some different ideas, and maybe that's what takes it back, and maybe the.
Let's ask Mr. Adler. Mr. Adler, do you have an opinion on all of this?
Well, again, I go back to the fact if the applicant came in originally, and I understand we have to deal with the applicant did this without a permit, but if the applicant came in originally, we would have suggested that they come up with a proposal that reduces the impervious surface that's in the front yard. Because I think that's logical. If you go to the Zoning Board of Appeals and you've got 400 square feet in the front yard and you say, I just want to move the sidewalk away from my neighbor adjacent to make the front main sidewalk, and it's going to now be 20 square feet less, we would probably tell that person they've got a chance of getting a positive recommendation on that. So when we meet with the applicant, I know this is different, and this is why it's difficult, because we're being asked now to take into consideration the fact that they did the work without a permit. Again, we always look at this, we always, when we talk to the zoning board, we tell them just to put that aside. It's not up to them to worry about if a permit was granted or not. What you look at is if they came in before the fact and asked for the relief, would you have granted it? And if you would have, you should vote for it. You could put, if you want to put that the village board should look for some sort of fine or damages for doing work, but that's what we try to tell the zoning board. So to answer your question, I would have told the applicant, if you're 400 square feet, come in with less than that, 390, 380. So you could show that the amount of impervious surface is less.
Also work to minimize it, and none of us got the chance to ask, why do you need a 6-foot sidewalk versus 5 foot? And that would have been a legitimate question to ask the zoning. from one of those
Absolutely, and it might have been denied, but I think the question,
Or reduced at the meeting.
Right.
Which is more likely what would have happened.
Right.
It would have been reduced. He would have said, I can live, if you're going to give me my approval, I can live with 5.5 feet or 5 feet.
And I have to say, if an applicant came in and showed us a 7-foot wide driveway, that would probably
Sidewalk, yeah.
Sidewalk, yeah. That's probably one. You're absolutely right. That'd been one of the things we would say, that looks pretty wide. So can you reduce it some? That's one suggestion we would have. That's a good point.
So, I guess going back, I don't, whatever the process, they go back and come up with some solutions, go through zoning, come to us and see what happens.
So,
I mean, because we've done that, we did that, that's what happened on the house over on the golf course, too.
right, and they fixed it.
Yeah.
Right? And it was a very similar situation where
That's
work done without a permit and work done that we never would have approved, and they went back to zoning and they fixed it.
And it was a split recommendation, and I think that might be the best process. In this case, the delay doesn't affect the applicant because it's in. I mean, the main thing we would want them to do, though, is to put the railing up so it's safe. But they could do that regardless. They don't need, that's not a variation to put the railing up.
Okay, so from the conversations that we've heard, I would entertain a motion to remand this case back to, just clarification, Mr. Stein, if we remand it back to zoning, then any sort of enforcement action is stayed. They're still in the process, so there's no action the village would take while it's still being in zoning. So I would entertain a motion to remand this case back to the zoning board.
So moved.
And is there a second?
Second.
Okay.
I just have
Any further discussion? Okay,
I just have a
Trustee-
question. So we're remanding it back to the zoning board, but what's happening with the the fee, the penalty, the fine?
That's suspended for now.
That's suspended for now, and then when it comes back on consent, we'll...
Well, should we discuss that now, or maybe we discuss it when it's all resolved?
I was going to say, because if they decide to rip the whole thing out.
Then there's no point in it.
Right. Then you don't have to fine them on top of it. We can, let's put that aside for now as well. That would be my suggestion. So,
I think the applicant should understand that, even before zoning, you should discuss
You should talk to staff, right,
Talk to
yeah,
staff
yeah.
anyway, just about preparing or getting creative, who knows, before he goes back to zoning.
right. Okay, so did I get a motion?
Doesn't like that answer.
I just want to say, I think regardless of what the resolution is, there should be some penalty or fee for somebody not, knowing that they needed a permit and just didn't follow the permit process.
And if they incur $3,000 of cost, I'm just making up that number in fixing it, there is a penalty element to that, I think. We're not making a decision on it. We can talk about it more. Okay. Did I get a motion and a second?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Any further discussion? Okay. Madam Clerk, please call the roll on the motion to remand to the zoning board.
Trustee Wolf.
Aye.
Trustee Sullivan.
Aye.
Trustee Plunkett.
Aye.
Trustee Dodd.
Aye.
Trustee Kurzman.
Aye.
Trustee Pierce.
Aye.
President Blinsky.
Aye. So motion carries. This case is remanded to the Zoning Board of Appeals. Trustee Pierce.
That concludes land use.
God, you took a long time tonight. Get faster. Finance Committee, Trustee Sullivan.
We had one item that was approved on consent.
Administration Committee, Trustee Dodd.
All items were on consent.
Municipal Services, Trustee Wolf.
All items covered on consent.
Public Safety, Trustee Kurzman.
All items covered on consent.
Judiciary Committee, Trustee Plunkett.
All items covered on consent.
Okay, item 6.7 is reports from the special committees, and there are no reports. Item 7 is new business. There's no additional new business to discuss. And item 8 is adjournment. So may I have a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? We stand adjourned at 10:29 p.m.
Total Info, News,